call me Mr. Positive. That's why they call. That's why they call me Mr. Positive. And even if the world goes crazy, I will always stay the same. That's why they call. That's why they call me Mr. Positive.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I'm your host, Peter Dixon, and I've got my special Christmas festive shirt on. And my very special guest is Matthew J. Lucio. How are you, Matthew?
I'm doing fantastic. I am trying to stay warm here in this winter up here in northern United States.
It's the opposite, isn't it?
It is the opposite. You look all tropical. I
It
don't
is
understand these
boiling.
people. They put Christmas lights on palm trees, and I don't know what Christmas in summer feels like. It feels wrong. I'm going to be honest with you.
It is wrong.
We all know there was snow around the manger. It was a nice Norwegian setting.
It was a Norwegian setting. Oh, I love it. Hey, we're going to get right into it. Welcome, everybody. Fire away in the comments there. Let us know where you're watching from. And it looks like this conversation still, for some reason, haven't wiped from yesterday's interview going on the side there. So we'll ignore that. We've got Carl Wagner watching. How are you, Carl? Glad you're here. George
All right,
is here.
Carl, you're my fact checker, Carl.
Oh, good. And George is saying hi to Carl as well. Let me just quickly set my monitor up so I can view what the Facebook users are saying. Remember, if you are watching on Facebook, please in the comments. Oh, let's get that volume down. That way I know who has said things. Peter Mashenko is watching, and he has said, great to see you guys. You're getting quicker in starting, Peter. Yes, I'm trying to be more on time. That's why I do that long introduction. And we've got here Kelly Nelson's watching all the way from USA, and Dale's watching from California. And we've got Mark Anthony is watching this man, Dr. M. Lucio.
Doctor.
Brilliant. Yeah. Someone said that I should do my PhD based on this program.
Yeah, I think you've done a lot of work. You just need to write it up.
Yeah, well, I'm waiting for AI to get a little bit more clever, and I'll just say, write me a book. Here's the content.
Oh, you know what? Upstairs, I have a pirate Bible. And I think basically somebody just took the King James version and had AI translate every chapter to sound like a pirate. Then they self-printed it and sold it. And
can you give us a quote?
Somehow I ended up with one.
I love it. Oh, that is classic. And Rodney Smith has noticed, where's your ugly Christmas sweater? Look closely, this is a Christmas outfit. I wore it last night, actually, Matthew, for our family Santa photo. And here's what's funny with the heat in Australia. It was boiling.
Yeah.
Late afternoon, after the interview I did yesterday, we're out there in the Aussie bush.
Mm-hmm.
I've got this shirt on. My girls are dressed up. My wife's all dressed up. And there's Santa, beard, hat, full Santa regalia. And I'm like, mate, what's it like inside that suit? And he just said, you don't want to know. Oh, classic.
I never thought about that.
Oh, look, it's just ridiculous. We're having a Christmas party on our front lawn. You're invited. And we've got Christmas carolers coming in. We've got karaoke machine coming in so people can sing Christmas carols. And it's going to be sweltering. Jillian's watching. I'll just quick say Jillian's watching from Caloundra. Awesome.
Oh.
What are you going to say, Matthew?
Good. I was just going to ask, a lot of the hymns and Christmas carols and things like that are often snow related, sleigh related, whatever. You guys just skip those?
Mm-mm.
Are there?
No.
You still sing those even though it.
Yeah, we sing them all.
I didn't know if there was any unique ones for
warm
weather.
I mentioned yesterday that we have an Aussie Jingle Bells that someone over here wrote, and it starts dashing through the bush in a rusty Holden ute. And it's all, it's a really good one. Maybe I breached copyright by singing that, but anyway. So my very special guest, Matthew J. Lucio, and he's the founder and main spokesperson on Advent History Podcast. I highly recommend you guys go and watch it. Listen to it. I mean, it is so good. So good. I often recommend your podcast and Test the Prophet and Answering Adventism. There's some great Adventist resources out there. So we had a long discussion. We're going to keep this to 2 hours. We had a long discussion, maximum. We might even go shorter. But we had a long discussion about questions on doctrine. I'm going to get you to quickly summarize that for those who are just tuning in today for the first time. Quick 5-minute summary. We talked a lot about questions on doctrine. We talked about the build up to it. And today, our part 2, I want to kind of recap that. But then I want to talk about what happened next. What were the ramifications leading up to about 1984? And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to unpacking all of that. So yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much. It is an honor to be in this privileged position. I watched your show last night with Thunder, and a really interesting conversation you have with people. And I really appreciate, by the way, I'm just going to go ahead and suck up to you now so you ask me easier questions later. But, look, you deal with a lot of different people. Some dyed-in-the-wool apologists, some real kind of forceful critics of the Adventist church. And anyways, I appreciate the conversations you have with everybody. And it's a real useful resource.
Thank you. Thank you. Coming from you, that is high praise indeed. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, in listening to Thunder, obviously we're going to disagree on some things, but just listening to him, sometimes I sit there and I think, oh, this must be what the Catholics and other Protestants felt like when we critique them and call them Babylon and apostate, this, that, and the other. I think at one point Thunder was like, we're here to tell the truth because Adventism is sick and you're going to have like a short life and we're trying to bring you the medicine. And I'm like, that doesn't feel great to hear that. But I imagine that's probably what we've said about other people. So I get it. I get it.
I like the idea of not having to create an echo chamber where we listen to something we don't agree and therefore go, right, we're not going to listen to them anymore. I love having different people on the show. And even yesterday, I don't know if you noticed in the comments, there was that guy, Champion of Jesus, Emmanuel. And I'm going to have him on the show. I don't mind that.
I noticed
we
that.
Probably disagree. I think it's healthy to try and kind of stay together as we have these interesting conversations.
Yeah, I do too. And by the way, I see Carl there in the comments saying he can't find his QOD. I got a version here, although I'm going to guess Carl is going to tell me he's got the original. I was offered one, but I didn't accept because I didn't feel like I needed it since it's online. But I'll take the anniversary edition. But I agree. Let's have good conversations, and and an encouragement to those in the comments. I know you're kind of in your own world there, but hey, throw us some questions, and be supportive of one another. Ask good questions. Respond humbly. We can have a good environment down there too.
Okay. Hey, just before you start, and to that point, what I'm going to do for this first flush of conversation is go for it in the comments, everyone. But there'll be a time when I say, "Can you ask Matthew some specific questions a little bit later?" In which case, that because of what I'm finding, as I said last time, Matthew, the feed is going so fast now; they literally drop off the top, and I won't be able to access them. So hold your pertinent, important questions for Matthew till I ask for it, and then we can bring them up. Over to you, Matthew.
Okay, I'll answer the question for real this time. Okay, so if you guys were not here a couple weeks ago when we did this, did the first part of this, I'll summarize what was probably 2.5 hours or 2 hours in just a few minutes for you. So we're talking about questions on doctrine. We're going to abbreviate it QOD. It's just for shorthand. It's this book right here, hugely controversial and maybe consequential book in Adventist history, published in 1957. We were talking about the run-up to the publication of that book, which was the Adventist Evangelical Conferences. That is, a few prominent evangelicals and a few prominent Adventists got together, talked about what Adventists believe, answered some questions. And so last week we started with, how did those conversations even start? Started with a conference president, T.E. Unruh, who wrote a letter to Donald Gray Barnhouse, and even a very, very popular evangelical leader. He was doing some radio broadcasts on the book of Romans, which he would do until his death. And I have his Romans books, his commentary, in my office at church. And so anyways, wrote to Barnhouse, said, I appreciated what you said about righteousness by faith. This alarmed Barnhouse, didn't expect an Adventist to appreciate righteousness by faith, because like many, he assumed that Adventists were all legalists and all of that. So that started the conversation that didn't really get anywhere until Walter Martin, another evangelical, enters the scene. He's writing a book on cults. He wants to include Adventism in it, but he realizes he doesn't really know a lot, and he talks about it with Barnhouse. Barnhouse says, yeah, I think I corresponded with a prominent Adventist at one point. Go check out my file and see if you can find that letter. He does. Martin does. That leads him to a conversation with Leroy Froome, another Adventist leader, and the Adventist evangelical conferences were born. They lasted from the spring, from March of 1955 all the way until May of 1956. And so they would meet periodically during this time. And I think we talked about the first four, the only ones that happened in 1955. And that included one at the Barnhouse house, or the Barnhouse barn, I think, as Peter put it then. And the result after those first four meetings was that Barnhouse and Martin were willing to consider Adventists to be fellow Christians. Now, admittedly, fellow Christians, but very weird. Okay, that didn't mean they endorsed everything Adventists believed, but the core of as it pertained to the gospel and Jesus Christ, they were willing to say, okay, Adventists are Orthodox, just a little weird, or maybe a lot weird, but they're one of us. And so that was really the pivotal moment, that fourth meeting in August 1955 at the Barnhouse house. And I think that's more or less where we left it off. We talked a little bit. They took a break through the fall. We talked a little bit about that. That's when the Adventists went to go talk to the General Conference president, Reuben Figuer, and say, hey, here's where we're at in this process. Do you guys endorse what we've done and how we've answered Martin's questions? And the General Conference said, yeah. And during that time, Martin would go and talk to other evangelical leaders saying, this is where we're at. Are you guys going to endorse our conclusion that Adventists are fellow Christians? So I think that's where we left it off. I hope that's a good summary.
Yeah, that's great. Brilliant summary. And one of the reasons we've highlighted that it was such an important book and meeting is because it was the first time really that Adventists got to portray their version of Adventism to the rest of the Christian body in an attempt to be seen as more evangelical than perhaps they were. So this is where the trouble started, and where I want to kind of focus on today. People like Andreasen, I'll get you to unpack him a little bit more. And, those that were a part of the, I'm just forgetting the little acronym for the committee. Frida, that's right. Began to kind of go hammer and tongs. At some point, Questions on Doctrine was taken off the Adventist Book Center playlist, and the lines were drawn. And that's why I've often said that was the ground zero point of our current tensions, where we seem to have traditional Adventists, progressive Adventists, and sure, you can go right back to 1888. Adventists have always had kind of tension and loggerheads and people disagreeing and agreeing, and I like that. That's great. But this was the point where many, and I think in some ways they had a leg to stand on. No, they had grounds for these complaints. Many felt
Yeah.
that the questions on doctrine had betrayed them and betrayed real Adventism. And I think you may have mentioned last interview that those that were portraying this new theology or the new Adventism were kind of looking ahead. Perhaps that's how they wanted it to become.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in your thoughts now on what happened next. Perhaps start with Andreasen. Is it Andreasen or Andreasen?
Yeah, I always say Andreasen, but I haven't asked him how he wants me to call him.
I'm pretty sure that's the accurate one. I'm notorious for getting
Actually,
names wrong.
Oh, you know what? It's an occupational hazard, I think, in your. So let me just back up, because there was a few more things that happened before we get to Andreasen.
Sure.
Okay,
yeah.
So I know I left because I remember the conversation I had with Carl a couple weeks ago about Martin published his Rise of the Cults in December of 1955. So they're on a break. The conferences between the Adventists and Evangelicals are on a break, and that was a tiff in their relationship, a strain on their relationship, because Martin had removed a chapter on Adventists, but he did not remove all references to Adventists. I think Frida counted like 14 mentions of Adventists in a negative sense. And so it's like, hey, we're here talking in good faith. You said you accepted us as Christians, and then boom, your book comes out saying, painting us in a negative light, insinuating that we're a cult, or at least non-Christian. So that there was a little bit of, are we being had? There was kind of a mutual. This was a trust building exercise. Let's just put it that way. Can we trust you to follow through with what you're saying? Because for Frida, if we start telling our General Conference president and then our church members that, things are going really well with Martin and Barnhouse and George Cannon and the evangelical side, and then suddenly we find out you guys renege on it, we're going to have egg on our face. We're going to look really bad. We're going to look incompetent. And stir up a lot of trouble in the church for no reason. For the evangelical side, I mean, they had stakes in this too. They can't, if they say that Adventists are Christian and then find out that Adventists had lied to them or tricked them or kind of dissembled and didn't really tell them the whole truth, and that comes out, then they're going to look bad too and lose subscribers for Barnhouse's magazine. So both sides had something to learn, both sides to lose. Both sides had you had to trust each other that the other side was acting in good faith. And so, that was this Rise of the Cults book really strained that at the end of 1955, because it's like, I don't know if we can trust Martin, but then it's like, well, we've had such good times when we were together. We got to sort this out. So Martin actually called Froome in January of 1956 and apologized and said, I had written it before we started meeting, and while I took out the chapter on you guys, I didn't get rid of every reference. And Julius Nahm, who wrote his dissertation on this subject, says that that's a little disingenuous. Like, how do you have 8 months since the conferences started to edit your book before it appears? How do you not kind of go through that and remove every reference if that's what you're telling the Adventists to their face, that they're Christian? So don't let your book come out, because that's embarrassing. without editing out all those mentions. So anyways, it worked out. They met again in February 1956, and this time Martin actually got to preach at the Tacoma Park Church. He also got to address the Adventist Seminary, and so this was trust. Right, we're bringing you into our kind of a denominational home, to our seminary, to one of the major churches in the denomination at the time, and we're letting you address them. We're not putting shackles on what you can say. We're trusting that you're not going to get up there and talk about why the Sabbath is dumb and go to church on Sunday. We're trusting that you're going to say something appropriate. And anyway, so. This was a serious thing, and it went really, really well. Froome called the February meetings the most important one of our conferences. So that was a big deal. Then they met one final time. Yeah, they met one final time in May, as I said, May 1956, in Doylestown, which is at Barnhouse House again. And that was purely about discussing the publication strategy, because now that they've come to the conclusion that Adventists are Christian, well, how do we tell people? How do we announce this? in the best way, So that's what that was all about. And they settled on the evangelicals getting first publishing rights, I guess. And that was going to be 1956 in the month of September in Eternity magazine, which was Barnhouse's magazine. They would get to break the news there. Okay. So in true Barnhouse fashion, and this is all online, anybody can go read this. True Barnhouse fashion, his first article in this series announcing this rapprochement with Adventists spent 50% of the time talking about what he disagreed with Adventism. Like half of it is, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with this. And then with all that out of the way, he said that he was delighted to do justice to a much maligned group of sincere believers and to call them fellow Christians. So we'll take it,
He knew he was about to get a lot of flack himself.
He did.
He had to kind of prepare, yeah. It's like the first 4 or 5 chapters of Matthew where he's setting the scene.
Yes. Yeah. No, man, you could just absolutely tell. I mean, he didn't start off by saying, hey, Adventists are great, and we had a lot of good meetings. Thanks for your time. It was hedging, he was protecting himself. And in the end, it didn't do a whole lot of good because they lost a third of their subscribers, which was probably about, they had like 33,000 subscribers. So they lost about 11,000, 10,000, which is a huge blow for any organization, right?
Yeah, 30% of your audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they would that would have been where he would have been advertising products, getting subscription money. Massive blow.
Massive blow.
You mentioned last time that the numbers picked up again, but they were probably picked up by Adventists suddenly subscribing to the thing.
Yeah, we don't know for sure, but it's very possible. Yeah.
I wonder how they felt about that.
I don't know. I imagine
in some ways they were kind of still not reaching the audience they had once reached.
Right.
I wonder if they ever recovered from that.
I think they recovered from it. I do think over time they did. Barnhouse, I want to say he died in 1961, so I don't know that he lived to really see it. And Eternity limped on for a bit longer, but I mean, like it is with some of these magazines, they have a heyday and then they just kind of linger on. All publishing is kind of in that boat right now, right? But I think the heyday may have been over with Eternity, but I don't know. But anyway, so Barnhouse wrote that first article September 1956, and then for the next 2 months, Martin wrote articles. So Barnhouse kind of did the introduction to the series. Martin, in October, the next month, talked basically about Adventist history and Ellen White's role in Adventist history. And then in November, he talked about Adventist theology. And then about a year after that, Barnhouse wrote a final article addressing the fallout. He kind of waited to see what the reaction was going to be and then responded to it. What's interesting about the October one, the first article Martin wrote, is that he says, to refute Ellen G. White either as a person or theologically is certainly not to refute Seventh-day Adventism per se, for there are schools of interpretation within the Seventh-day Adventist movement which disagree with Ellen G. White's interpretation on some point. So I think that's basically right in the sense that Adventism was a diverse group, and there's the official narrative just like there is today, and then there's as groups of Adventists that believe different things. But I think what was important about that statement that Martin made is that even today, and it's somewhat understandable, right? But even today, a lot of the people, when you want to critique Adventism, you critique Ellen White. And people assume, I think, that everything stands or falls on Ellen White. And I understand why people think that way, for sure. She's the founder of the church. Adventists believe she has the gift of prophecy. She's kind of the major force behind the development of the church in many respects. And so I can understand why people think if you kind of kick that leg out from underneath the chair, the whole thing's going to fall over. But I think, as you know, Peter, there are plenty of Adventists, at least today, and certainly then as well, who just say, I can do without 1844. I don't care. And I think Ellen White had a lot of good things to say, and some things I don't agree with. But, it doesn't bother me if you tell me she plagiarized. Like, I wish she wouldn't, but whatever. Everything doesn't stand or fall in Ellen White. Now, of course, I would say majority of Adventists still hold her as a prophet and believe in 1844 and stuff like that. Obviously, my context is this English-speaking Western world, and we are like 5% in North America of the global church membership. So I want to be conscious of the fact that sometimes in America, Europe, or Australia, we can tend to speak as if we speak for Adventism.
Interesting.
And we don't. We don't. And we haven't for 100 years now. So, we're an increasingly diminishing share of the global church. So I'm not saying that I disagree with whatever either of those positions on Ellen White. I'm just saying Adventism is a complex place. Not everybody needs Ellen White to be Adventist. Most, I think, do. But Martin observed that even in 1956, that just taking down Ellen White is not enough to take down Adventism. Not for everybody, at least. So I think he was writing that to his fellow evangelicals to let them know, like, there's other ways to critique Adventism. It's not all Ellen White. So, and I think that's still probably good counsel. And I noticed how thorough Thunder was yesterday. It's not all Ellen White, right? He goes through all the doctrines and stuff as well. But anyways, okay. So interestingly enough, in November, so Martin's second article, the one that's focused on Adventist theology, he takes another shot at his fellow evangelicals, and he says, true Seventh-day Adventism, despite its differences from us, is one with us in the great work of winning men to Jesus Christ. And, I think if that's what it means to be Christian, like, do you see Seventh-day Adventists? Do you see Catholics? Do you see Baptists? Do you see non-denominational, whatever? Are they, even despite the differences, are they working with you in the great work of winning, he says winning men, of course, winning men and women, winning everybody to Jesus Christ? Like, is that what we're doing? Is that what qualifies somebody as being a Christian? And I wish I could have a conversation with Walter Martin about that, but I was born too late, unfortunately. I don't know. Is that what it takes? Is that what this is about? And, are we Adventists working together with Baptists to reach the world by winning them to Jesus?
Why? And I think most progressive Adventists would agree with you. Why do you think there's so much fire out there, against Adventists? So if you look at the Christian body and Baptists and Protestants and Anglicans and in many ways, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons have taken themselves off the table anyway. But Adventists do want to be part of the Christian body, and most Adventist pastors in their local areas want to be part of the Christian fraternal in that community that usually gather and meet. Why is it only Adventists that have such a polemic kind of attachment to this? Like, there's no podcasts about Baptists like this. There's no podcasts out there accusing Anglicans of not being Christian. Why do Adventists get this big focus and an attack in some ways?
That's a really good question. And, I don't know that I'm entirely qualified to answer it because I have my own biases and my own perspective here. But, I think in part, like you said, because Adventists aspire to belong to the wider Christian community. We want to belong. Like you said, it's not like some other groups that are like, forget you guys. We're doing our own thing here, right? Like, Adventists want to fit in, but Adventists also want to remain different. And I feel like that tension, it's kind of like somebody going to your house for Christmas, and you put out I don't know, whatever you cook, chicken or turkey or lamb or whatever you eat, emu, cassowary, whatever it is you guys eat down there. And somebody's like, well, I'm going to be gluten-free and vegan and all of these things. Like I want to come to your house and eat, but I want to eat my own food, not the stuff you made.
Yes.
And it's kind of like, well, you're welcome, but also you're weird.
Is it a little bit of that moral higher ground that a lot of other people kind of think?
there's definitely a certain, like, the claims of Adventism are I imagine people probably look at us like we have that small dog syndrome. Here's like this little group of people on the face of the earth with like zero history, and they're like saying we're the true church and you guys are Babylon. Like, who do you think you are? It's like you just got here in historical terms. Like there's an audacity to Adventism. Some might call that arrogance, but certainly an audacity to Adventism.
And there's a claim to be the remnant and a special people with a special message for everyone at the end times. One thing I find frustrating is that when you then say to an Adventist, are you the remnant? Do you have a special message? Are you unique for this end time? They always go, no. We're part of the remnant. It's this kind of constant subterfuge. Is that the right pronunciation? The constant, here we are. And then people go, oh, is that what you are? No, we're this over here. Another mask comes on. And one of the reasons I love your podcast is that you're very frank with how you present the material. You're a brilliant historian where you're going, here's the information, here's both sides. You're not covering up things. You're willing to let the chips land where they may. But most Adventists aren't like that. And I think that's why it's frustrating for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think I think you definitely see that in this QOD story. You definitely see I can understand why Walter Martin will later on, I know we'll get to the 1980s with the Ankerberg show, but I can understand why he's frustrated there. Because, and I can understand, by the way, why Adventists have a hard time communicating in this story as well. It's because you have two audiences. You have the evangelical side, many of which are still fundamentalists. You have the Adventist side, many of which are still fundamentalists. And I mean, like, so you're trying to speak to both audiences, which are almost just diametrically opposed. I mean, I don't know. It'd be like having half your audience at a concert being like avid rock fans and the other half being like hymn singing pilgrims. You know what I mean? It's like, what music are you going to sing that's going to appeal to both of them? So let's put it this way. It's just really funny. I know we'll get to the reaction to this in just a minute, but so the Adventists were saying, we have not changed in these discussions with the evangelicals. We just explained it in words that they would understand. The evangelical leaders, Martin and Bauerhaus, said, Adventists changed. Now they're one of us. The Adventists who dissented, like Andreasen, said, Adventists are changing. And their leaders are saying, no, we didn't change. And the evangelical leaders are saying, they changed. And then the evangelical dissenters are saying, they didn't change. They tricked you. And it's like nobody, you know what I mean? Like there's this huge confusion over what actually happened. Did we change? Did we not change? Does Questions on Doctrine represent a repudiation of Adventist theology, a departure from Adventist theology, or is it consistent with Adventist theology? And the fact is, like, that's not actually a really easy question for people to answer. And hence they've been arguing about it ever since.
Is it possible? I know when I left the church, I've said this to you before, a lot of the local community who had once treated me very nicely, I'd never had problems, and they continue to treat me nicely, but they were suddenly like, oh, okay, so we can be real around you now. And so I was amazed at how the local community, the non-Adventists, are way more comfortable in just sharing to me their warts and all. Whereas before they'd be around the Adventists and they'd be, a little bit walking on eggshells. And one of the things I also noticed is that Adventists in the community, when they were trying to connect with these other secular and non-Adventist people that I was now kind of embraced into that community, whenever they would connect, there was always an ulterior motive, friendly, nice. Hey, we've got this special barbecue on. We'd love you guys to come along. And after Adventists even pride themselves at doing this. We were witnessing and we were nice and we did this and look at this great cooking show we did. And then we can share with them the truths of Adventism. I wonder, and this is the question, if the very core of QOD was to share, to get influence within the general evangelical Christian body, not so that Adventists could become one with them, but rather that they could go, now we're here and we can witness, like a bit of a Trojan horse. Is that a possibility?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I don't think. I mean, I've certainly never seen a letter from Frida, any of those men at the top there, indicating that they had like, oh, good, rubbing their hands together. Now we can get inroads.
now we can
into
witness.
I mean, you have to understand, I think also for the Adventists, like the Zondervan and some of these other evangelical publishing houses and stuff, like it was a nonstop attack. And the evangelical world is so much bigger than the Adventist world. And so they have bigger presses, bigger budgets, more speakers, more writers. And it's just like, you feel like you're constantly under attack. And Adventists, of course, return fire, but it's not to the same caliber. There's not as much of that. And, the idea of having a truce is a reward in and of itself.
Right.
Can we just stop hating on each other? You know what I mean? Because there's a whole industry, the whole cult research thing is a whole industry. People can make their careers critiquing other churches and where they're wrong and where they're right. And, but I will admit this, and maybe this is what's going to get me in trouble in my career. I'm waiting for my heresy trial, and everything I've done thus far has not earned me one, which I'm very disappointed by. So let's just keep putting my toe in the water and find out when I get my glacier view. I'll do that.
Pastors, you're one of the few pastors that does now.
Listen, to the general conference, when I get my heresy trial, can I choose where my heresy trial takes place? Because I'd rather go to Colaqua. It's in Florida. It's very nice. Maybe we can do it in Australia or Hawaii or somewhere. Like, why do we got to do it at the general conference? Why Glacier View? I mean, I know Colorado's pretty, but
there's not enough oxygen at Glacier View.
Yeah, it messes with your head. So all I'm saying is, when my heresy trial comes, can I please choose the location? That's all I'm asking. It's all. Okay. So anyways, here's what get me in trouble. Like, there are definitely cult-ish flavors in Adventism. And I think it's not by design, but because you're a small group with a very intense set of meaning. We're going to hasten the coming of Jesus, and we're the remnant people, and we've got a message for the entire world. Like, this little group is somehow going to warn the entire world that Jesus is coming and lead to large conversions and all. I mean, that is a lot of pressure to be an Adventist in a traditional sense, right? There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of meaning. If you eat this donut, are you violating the health message and you're going to be lost? I mean, like, that is a lot of weight to put on the decision to eat a donut. Like, let's be honest. You know what I mean? Are you going to be saved if you eat meat? That's a lot of pressure when you're in the line at McDonald's or something, thinking about whether you're going to get that Big Mac. So Adventism is very high pressure, and it's a lot of high pressure in a small space. And some people thrive in that kind of pressure. They love it, because they don't want to just be a vanilla Christian in the pew, twiddling their thumbs. They want an audacious mission. They want a high sense of meaning. I'm important in the world. I have something to do that God has given me. This kind of stuff, right? They love that. Other people really, really do not like the pressure. They could do without it. They just want to live their lives, and they want to do evangelism. They want to spread the gospel by all means, but they just don't want all that pressure to do it. And so I think that because Adventism is this very kind of almost hermetically sealed community, it definitely gives off cult vibes. I don't think Adventism is a cult. Let me be clear about that. I don't like the word, but I understand why that word keeps popping up. I don't think it should apply to Adventism, but I get it. It's a clique. It's a club. And when you're not in the club, you kind of hate on the popular kids at school, or you hate on the country club people, or you hate on the elites in society. We kind of hate on groups like that, especially if we think that they think that they're better than us. Yeah, good point. And I think too, when a movement has a very charismatic leader,
Like there's like if you look at Elvis Presley, the fans of Elvis, some just like putting a Elvis on at Christmas time or a little bit of Elvis here and there. Others have formed almost cult-like fan clubs of Elvis Presley. So once you have a charismatic face, and Ellen White, let's face it, what a charismatic person. Imagine her at camp meetings, no PA, no microphones. She's there with this. I love listening. I've got, and you might like a copy of this too. I don't know if you've got one, but the sermons she took 1888. There's 10 sermons that were just a stenographer wrote down, as she said. I know they're hard to get, but I've got a book of them. But I love reading them because I can feel that passion coming through. She's vibrant, charismatic, very entertaining. And as soon as you have someone like that, there are going to be people, more than just a few people, that put someone like that on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And then they start looking at, she did this and she held the Bible up and she did this. And then the urban myths start and away it goes. And what do you think about that? Like, is there a way that at some point Adventists could ever just take her a little bit off that kind of gravy train of stardom?
Yeah. I think that's what's happened the so many decades. Now, maybe not officially, right? But for many, many Adventists, that's what's happened. I think even my professors. I went to Southern Adventist University, which is considered but it's a conservative of our version of our universities. It's not, it has that reputation. But even there, we talked about plagiarism. We talked about, these are things that never would have been discussed, obviously, before Walter Ray, before Don McAdams, right? So all I'm saying is those conversations are happening where they wouldn't have happened in the days of QOD, and so they're happening. And I just did a podcast episode for my supporters, and we talked about critics of the Adventist Church and stuff like that. And I think sometimes it's important to have criticism from the outside. I don't say critics as if it's a pejorative. Critics are always bad. Sometimes you need criticism. Sometimes you need somebody from the outside to say what you guys are doing is wrong, or mistaken, or misguided, or whatever it may be. We can't all see ourselves as we perfectly. Sometimes you need somebody else's perspective on the outside. But what I wish some of them would understand is some of the things they bring up, like, they don't want to talk about plagiarism. It's like, man. Some of the fiercest, most critical discussions that I've ever been a part of have been with fellow Adventists about the church. I don't think people should have the impression that we're just kind of in la la land here.
No.
Like in some respect, obviously the outside perspective, as I say, matters, but also like the people who are in the know can have the most frank, forthright conversation. Now, sometimes they lack the courage to kind of do something with that conversation, right? Because they're employed, or they have a lot to lose. But I mean, there's frank conversations about things, and there's great conversations happening about problems, about things at Ellen White's pedestal. George Knight wrote that book about the what does he call it? Whatever, I don't remember how exactly he phrased it, but that golden age of this myth of Ellen White, in the 50s and 40s.
Yeah.
The good news, though, Peter, about cult leaders being charismatic, if Ellen White was one of those kind of charismatic individuals, the good news is we have never had a church leader who's been charismatic ever since. So there's no danger of this ever happening again, because we are allergic to personality.
And by the way, I wasn't suggesting either that she was a cult-like leader. I was suggesting that whenever you have a charismatic leader, there are going to be people in the membership that turn these, even with Des Ford, charismatic leader. There's people out there that have idolized him to a point that he would have felt very uncomfortable with.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think there is a place, I know I said Adventism can be cultish or look, have that appearance. And I want to keep qualifying that just to forestall my heresy trial just a little bit longer. Look, I follow American football. You may follow your particular sport, cricket or soccer or whatever, rugby. But if you get into a locker room with a football team, like a football team, especially college football, which I follow, is cultish also. Because here's the coach with maybe 50, 60 students, and you're telling these 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, you're the best in the country. Everything's on your shoulders. If you're going to go out and win this game, it's all about you and how hard you're going to play and your discipline. I mean, like, what is that? Like, that's kind of that Adventism. That's that high pressure environment. That's performance driven, right? Like, we need you to go play your best. There's no righteousness by faith. There's no football by faith. But so these environments exist. They're not just religious environments. Adventism is just one of them. And I think because that's so different, and keep in mind, some of these denominations we have used to be something like that. I mean, I can't believe that people didn't treat Martin Luther that way back in the day. Oh, there he is. Like, can I, I just want to hear one of his sermons. I'll pay anything to let me hear one of his sermons. You know what I mean? But what happens over time? Their movement grew. The Lutherans grew. They grew away from Luther in many respects. Some of them did. And, they're kind of a different thing. Adventism, if we're talking about the Big Bang, Adventism is still very close to their Big Bang. Yeah. Where everything is really tight and packed. And while we do see Adventism kind of exploding like every other church has, they're still pretty close. And that's why I think there's some misunderstanding sometimes, because for Christians that have been, their denomination's been around for 500 years or almost 2,000 years in the case of the Catholics, it's like, well, why are you guys so, it's weird to see why are you guys having your Big Bang moment now when you come onto the scene full of energy. It's like, well, when we were young, we had that energy too. But sometimes we forget that, and we look down on younger groups. And Adventists can do that too with non-denominational churches that just formed, like, oh, they're just here and they think that they're going to transform our city and all that kind of stuff.
And do you think it helps with the Adventist fundamentals proclaiming her as ongoing authority? That doesn't help it dissipate, does it?
Well, that's a tough one.
And was it watered down a little bit in the 28 fundamentals? In the latest version, has that, because I know in 27 fundamentals and prior, it was the ongoing authority of Ellen G. White. Is the latest version watered that down?
I don't know. I'd have to look that up here and just I browser.
I haven't checked that.
Usually we're in danger of making statements stronger.
Yeah. I know.
Sometimes I wish they'd get watered down. But, I think it might be. But, like a couple weeks ago, we were talking. Here's my thing about Ellen White. And I'm not going to have the discussion about whether or not she's a prophet and all that kind of stuff. But I think here's my thing about her. I feel like if we knew as much about Jeremiah and Nehemiah and Isaiah as we do about Ellen White, we would also be questioning whether they're a prophet. I think the biblical prophets get shielded because we know so little about them. So when they appear to say something snarky or rude, like Micaiah is my favorite prophet. The one where, like, he's going to go into he's asked if I think it's Ahab and asking, should we go into battle? And he's like, yeah, go, prosper, the Lord's with you. Obviously in a sarcastic tone. And then it's like, see, he never says anything good about me. And another prophet comes and slaps him or hits him or whatever, and then that prophet says, where did the Spirit of God go when it left me to go to you, buddy? And then Micaiah is like, you're going to find out in the day that you're hiding underneath your bed in fear. And I'm like, man, we would not expect prophets to talk that way. But the thing is, we know nothing about them, virtually nothing about them. So it's easy to accept them as prophets. But when you see everybody's warts, their faults, when Ellen White was angry with her kids and said, God doesn't love disobedient children. I mean, like, what parent hasn't said something like that to their kids? I mean, I've never said that particularly, right? That's a hard thing to say. But we've all not represented Jesus very well to our kids. We've all said things we regret to our kids. Or she's, having marital problems. We just don't see that picture of people in the Bible. And I think that makes it easier to accept them because we don't see their faults. Now, that's not an argument saying Ellen White is definitely a prophet. All I'm saying is it's harder to accept somebody we know. Peter, if you came out and said, I feel like I have the gift of prophecy, the hardest people in some ways to accept that from you would be the people who know you the best.
Yeah.
Same thing with Jesus, right? The people in Nazareth were like, isn't this Joseph's son?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I like what you're saying there. And I think what's great about that is that what we then should really focus on is not that a prophet or someone who claims to be a messenger or someone that is receiving direct messages from God, we shouldn't then have to dig deeper and look at them to try and find fault in them. I mean, if you look at, many inspiring leaders of our lifetime, well, perhaps not your lifetime, but like Martin Luther King, for example, before you were born, but he, boy, he changed the world with inspiration and fantastic focus on his words and what he was saying. But he was a flawed man. Martin Luther himself was a flawed man. So what I'm saying is, when we put aside those connections of the prophet and their flawed lives, we then have to only look at the content of what they are saying God has shown them, and then evaluate that content and then decide, is this of God or not? And I think what a lot of people do is evaluate Ellen White's, not her life even, but those things she says, and find,
that's fair.
like Thunder was saying yesterday, even remove all of her flawed nature and things that she said that were just normal life stuff. There's some would say are some serious problems with what she said came from God, in that some of what she said seems to be not in the Bible at all.
Oh yeah, a lot of it. Yeah. Oh no,
so
I mean, definitely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, and in light of questions on doctrine and Adventists wanting to kind of be embraced and to move into the Christian community, that's another stumbling block for those looking on, going, well, you're wanting this authority of Ellen White, not her as a flawed person, but what she said came from God to be pronounced and ongoing.
Right.
And some of it is just unbiblical.
It's hard. So I think that's a fair, certainly in saying that Ellen White was flawed, and we have to, that doesn't mean that we just give anybody who wants to make that claim of being a prophet a free pass. If you there has to be a way to test them. All I'm saying is I think the more you know about somebody, the harder it is always going to be to accept that God
I agree.
is, you know what I mean? That's just in general. That is always going to be the case.
Because humans love to either uplift and idolize someone or tear them to shreds.
Yeah.
There's a human nature to do one or the other. No middle ground.
Because,
no middle ground.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if we wanted to go back and we could watch Jesus, obviously most people didn't believe in him. And you can look at him and say, well, he healed 25 people in that village, but I was next in line and he didn't heal me. Or, why didn't he, my daughter was demon possessed. Why didn't he find me and cast that demon out? You know what I mean? If you're looking for an objection, you can find one. Now, that is not to say that there aren't, that we shouldn't be testing these people. We absolutely should. All I'm saying is, I think because we know so little in the Bible, and what has been presented to us in the Bible, it has been presented by, Jesus's disciples and his followers. We're getting that side of things, but I'm sure there's a lot more details in there that we're not getting about any of the prophets. Maybe Isaiah was a jerk, but God used him and gave him a message to share.
Yeah.
So anyways,
and sometimes, and Ellen White did this for sure, people use that kind of, they're aware there's a bit of a draw card to their charisma, and they do good stuff. I'll just give a quick plug to Marianne de Berg, who sadly has passed on now, but she was very much involved with the White Estate here at Avondale, and she wrote this book, Stories from Sunnyside, and it's all about the great things that Ellen did for this community from 1981 to 1900. And so we, there's good things that can happen if someone is a charismatic figure as well. And it's often the case that that someone like an Ellen G. White will have lots of kind of almost excessively positive things said about her, and also possibly excessive negative things said about her. So somewhere in that maelstrom of communication, thought, and discussion, we need to then focus back again on, well, what were her messages?
Yeah,
and
right. Well,
and I guess back to QOD.
Okay, let's do it.
as we go back to that,
nice.
Is the world after QOD comes out? So we'll talk about the internal Adventist world and the confusion that happened there. Did the book, and we've touched on this, but did it allay people's fears, or did it kind of make them question Adventists even more ultimately?
Yeah. I don't know. It's hard to know how much of the impact you can ascribe to QOD, or how much of it is due to the kind of liberalizing of Western culture in general. You know what I mean? Like, people just by default are less interested in fighting over doctrinal differences. So how much, Adventists have a better relationship with the evangelical world today than we ever have. It's not perfect. It's not smooth, but it's better than it was. Now, is that due to QOD, or is that due to kind of the rise of secularism in our world, where people just don't care to argue anymore?
Good point.
And are tired of seeing mom and dad fight over, which version of a Baptist are you? And we're going to go to eternal war because you're on the Calvinist side and I'm on the Arminian side. At some point, kids grew up and said, "Can we just stop doing that?"
Yeah.
So I don't know, but it is a different world now, and I think at least QOD made a difference for some people, maybe a lot of people, on the evangelical side. But it does seem to be a book that was headed in the direction the world was going anyway.
Right. Yes.
And so it's hard to know.
Yeah. I think Michael Campbell says things along those lines too. About
that. Well, that must be right then. I know you've had Michael on here, but only once, right?
Yeah. Once. I think once. And then we chatted about a second time, and he's coming back. We chatted not that long ago, a few months ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as long as I'm on more than he is, that's all that matters to me. So if you get him on a second time, book me for a third time if you don't mind. I'll study something else.
We'll
I'll
keep
learn
a tally going on.
Yeah. I want a gold star in my crown. Okay, so QOD comes out. It actually came out. It got delayed. It was supposed to come out with the articles. That was the plan. The book comes out with the articles in Eternity magazine. And also, by the way, Martin's book, The Truth About Seventh-day Adventists, was supposed to come out around the same time. And that's why I guess some people saw a conspiracy in all this, right? Like, they're trying to shove this rapprochement down our throats. Like, look how carefully timed everything's supposed to be. Well, it didn't come out as coordinated as they had planned. QOD came out a year later in November of 1957. And his Truth About Seventh-day Adventism came out, Martin's book came out in 1960. So way, way late. But anyways, when QOD came out, Froome had a plan. I mean, Froome did this with his own books. He would send them out. That's kind of how he came to the attention of Walter Martin. He'd send the books out to different libraries, different denominations, all that kind of stuff. So when QOD came out, he did the same thing. 37 copies were sent to Methodist bishops, 29 were sent to various writers, 75 copies were sent to seminary professors. The World Council of Churches got copies. The National Council of Churches got copies. Like, they were not all Adventist friendly. Some of these are very, in theological terms, liberal groups. It did not matter. Everybody's getting QOD because he wanted it to be, this is your reference book. If your people ever have a question about what Adventists are all about, I want you to have this book somewhere in your library so you can answer it. That was the idea, right? So there is a little PR intention here, right? We want this to be the definition of who Adventists are. And so anyways, so that came out. And as we've talked about, we've hinted at, we've mentioned a number of times, the aftermath of it was intense.
Yeah. Let's get into that.
Okay. So Arthur Maxwell, we talked about him last time. He was on Team Froome. He was editor of Signs of the Times in the Pacific Press. And he wrote a big headline in October 1956, so just as the eternity issues are coming out, before QOD comes out, and it says Adventists vindicated, which
Wow.
is meant to sound like the evangelicals and the Adventists met, and the evangelicals, I guess, kind of caved and accepted that Adventists are all right. Not that they agreed with everything Adventists believed, but we had been in trial. We've been in the trial, and we've been vindicated. We won the court case, I guess, in the end. Fair enough. Maxwell called it one of the most. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he's a good newspaper man. He said it was vindication. Froome said it was vindication after a century of slander by their fellow Christians.
Wow.
And Maxwell called it one of the most epoch-making events in recent church history. So there was a sense that this is a really big deal. And obviously the pro-QOD people, the pro-Frida people in the Adventist church were definitely trying to sell it. Ministry Magazine ran a bunch of articles celebrating it, talking about the significance of this and all that. So again, if you're inclined to not see things the same way, you're going to look at this and say, this just smells like something is being sold to us, right? It smells like this was all planned ahead of time, and there's a coordination between the Adventists and the evangelical papers. They're all trying to tell us the same thing, and so naturally, some people are just not going to buy it. And Cottrell was one of them. He warned. He said, almost certainly there will arise a storm of opposition when our ministry and laity discover the real meaning of the actual terms on which we have achieved a rapprochement with Martin and other evangelicals. Now, that can sound like this was all a big scheme. I don't think that that's what he meant, when they discovered the real meaning of the actual terms. And by that, Froome and others would explain QOD by saying, we tried to use words that our non-Adventist friends would understand, that are going to sound strange to Adventists. And so, and there's some truth to what Cottrell said. I mean, there were some words, Adventists meant one thing by it, evangelicals could understand it a different way, and then we were content.
Yeah.
As long as we both thought it was a good thing. We're not going to correct the evangelicals and tell them they don't understand us. As long as they're happy, let them believe whatever they want. And I think atonement was one of those phrases. It was certainly a topic of conversation, but to the evangelicals, it meant one thing. To the Adventists, it meant another thing. But we could both talk about how we believe in the atonement. And so Cottrell's warning, there's a sense in which our agreement is somewhat superficial. It's not that deep. And how could it be? Because we've only met, a handful of times.
What an insightful person, Raymond. We say Cottrell over here, but Raymond Cottrell. What a very insightful person. And he's to play a big role a little bit later in this story in many ways as we come up to Glacier's View.
Yeah.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Now, the evangelical side of the reaction was, it was pretty much the same thing. You had a lot of people who said that Martin and Barnhouse got snowed. They Adventists tricked them. Adventism never changes. And I think maybe part of it was there's managers of local Christian bookstores refused to carry these issues of Eternity magazine because of what they wrote about Adventists. People would show up saying, "Can I get the latest Eternity?" and they'd say no. So I mean, it was serious.
Wow.
It was serious. And again, I think part of it is there's definitely, we won't talk about it, but with ministry, sometimes there's a little bit of competition, right? So if you have a rival magazine in the evangelical world, this is your chance to trash Eternity, and
true.
Oh,
human nature coming through again.
human nature, and it got serious. Martin DeHaan, who was a very a big selling author for Zondervan. This is where Walter Martin worked for Zondervan. And DeHaan and Martin had a choice conversation. Martin would later describe it saying that DeHaan chewed me out for 45 minutes as only DeHaan could. And DeHaan told Zondervan, I'm never going to publish another book with you two, the two Zondervan brothers,
Wow.
if you print Walter Martin's book on Seventh-day Adventism. If you publish a book accepting Adventists as Christians, I will never publish you again. And the Zondervan brothers told DeHaan, look, we don't want to lose you. We love you. Your work means a great deal to us. But if Walter is telling the truth, then this is a landmark issue. We want to get out there and tell the truth about it. And so it's others called Martin and Barnhouse traitors, saying that they betrayed the evangelical faith. I mean, it was really intense. Certainly, I would not want to be at the center of that storm. So it was intense for the evangelical side. And of course, if you're ready, we can get to Andreasen.
I'm ready.
All right.
I'm so glad you included that little bit there about the responses and the headlines that were coming out, because again, in some ways, if the Adventists had been less, we're vindicated and did the vindication dance, if they'd just toned that down a little bit, it may not have been something that caught the ear of Andreasen.
That might be true. The thing that triggered Andreasen, though, was he actually read the eternity thing, the first issues that dealt with this, and he read it, and he read because what you said cuts both ways. He read it, and he read Barnhouse and Martin saying Adventism has changed.
Yes,
and he believed that.
And tell us a little bit about him too, because he's no lower down sort of servant in the hierarchy of Adventism. He was very influential and was very respected. For decades.
Yeah, I think George Knight, I think, said he was Adventism's probably the top theologian, at least in a popular sense, among the Adventist public through the 1930s, 1940s. He was president at Union College. I mean, he was no slouch. And I actually did an Adventist History Extra. That's my podcast for supporters. I did an episode on him, because I don't agree with him personally in how he responded to QOD. Like, his theology is not my flavor. But I think sometimes people only define him by how he reacted to QOD, as if he never did anything else good.
I know.
He was just a grouch his whole life. No, he wasn't a grouch his whole life. He had. Anyways, but he's older. He's pushing 80 in the 1950s. He's in that age range. He had been retired, kind of, maybe against his will. He'd just been told that he was retired now.
And and I've kept saying this, and I'll say it again. I do feel that he had some valid concerns. Again, I don't agree with him. His beliefs, his claims, his teachings, his thoughts on Adventism in any way, but I believe that he had some valid concerns, and so he was, in many ways, quite a hero to the traditional Adventist, more so than they maybe even realize.
In many respects, I think he is the first kind of major conservative protest against church leaders, which is really surreal, because usually you have professors or somebody who kind of want the church to loosen up, and it's the leaders who are conservative, and they're wanting to talk about. I mean, even in the 40s, you have people saying we need to talk about Ellen White's use of sources. Obviously, 1919 Bible Conference wants to talk about that too. But in that case, it's the leaders kind of afraid of the more conservative Adventist public. In the 1940s, with some of these seminary professors wanting to talk about plagiarism, the 1940s is where we see the first example of professors banding together, wanting to do biblical research independent of the General Conference. And, they created a kind of a scholarly association informally among themselves, saying we want to be free to study the Bible however we want and to talk about it without being afraid. And the General Conference kind of put the reins, said, no, we'll start a biblical research institute, but it's going to be controlled by the General Conference. Right. So my point is, like, the story often enough was I don't want to use the word liberal conservative, but more open-minded individuals who felt that church leaders were putting handcuffs on them. But here you have a conservative member in M.L. Andreasen complaining that the church leaders were too liberal. It's a very unique critique, in Adventist history. It's like, how often do you complain that the church leaders are too liberal?
Yeah.
That's not something you found a lot or at all in the 1800s or early 1900s. So yes, he's kind of like the archetype for that. Everything is getting too liberal, and here we stand. I'm Martin Luther. Anyways, I wrote a blog post, a little biographical blog post on Andreasen's life. It really is a sad. He had a very sad childhood, very difficult childhood. And I wrote that because it's like, well, I want to humanize him. I want people to understand what he went through as a child. His parents were kind of middle class. They partied, and he just felt like they never really cared if he was there or not. They left some money in a jar or whatever in the house, and it's like, if you need money and you need to go out and eat somewhere or get a toy, just grab some money and go.
Wow.
But leave us alone.
Wow. How many brothers
So
and
with
sisters did he have?
I don't know. I don't know that he had any. Maybe one. I don't recall. I wrote about it, but I don't remember all the details. But he felt very alone, and then the family immigrated to North America later on. But like Adventism was his family, and so he felt very, very protective of Adventism. Like he didn't want to see his family kind of walk away from him theologically. And so he was going to fight for his family. So anyway, so QOD comes out. The important point here is Andreasen had problems with the Adventist evangelical conferences even before QOD came out. He was writing against it even before it came out. So like I said, the two catalysts for him was reading Eternity in September 1956 in those issues that they wrote about how Adventism has changed. The other catalyst for him was reading Leroy Froome's article in Ministry, where Froome wrote that Christ's death at the cross was a complete, perfect, and final atonement for man's sins. So when he read that the evangelicals were saying Adventism had changed, then he reads what Froome wrote saying atonement was complete at the cross. Not just complete, but complete, perfect, and final. That triggered Andreasen finally to say the evangelicals are right. Adventism is changing, and here's evidence of it, because Andreasen had written a book on the sanctuary service, arguing that you need the Day of Atonement, the antitypical Day of Atonement, to complete your, this is how he's looking at it. So this is in his wheelhouse. This is his subject matter, and never mind the fact that later church leaders would critique what Andreasen was saying by quoting his earlier book, saying, you said the exact same thing as QOD. You just don't remember. So That's a whole nother topic to get into. So anyways, Andreasen writes about Froome's article. He says, what concerns me are not the charges he makes, nor the numerous unfortunate expressions, nor even the superior attitude he exhibits, but the appalling theology that he sets forth as Adventist doctrine. He calls Froome shallow and confused. And he says, to some, this is the critical phrase, to some, it looks like the Omega so long foretold. And of course, that's a reference to Ellen White's Omega thing, if your listeners are
which then became a catchphrase right up to the present that a lot of the supporters of Andreasen still use. Yeah.
Yep. It's still a thing. Every generation, there's a new Omega book that comes out.
That's telling, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you remember Lewis Walton's in the early '80s.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. I love that one.
And then we have one of the Howards wrote an Omega book. I don't know, whatever, 8 years ago or so, maybe, from the Michigan conference here. I think from Michigan. Anyways, so Andreasen, Carl's saying in the comments here that Andreasen's only problem was with how QOD contradicted his last generation theology. And that's a whole nother topic to get into. He says the atonement and the human nature of Christ. Certainly, it began with the atonement, and later on, the human nature of Christ was brought into it. That's absolutely true. Those are two really, really big issues. But it wasn't just that. I mean, there were a bunch of little things also. Those were, I think, two of the bigger ones. But there was a bunch of little things. He didn't like the optics of the Adventist evangelical conferences. It's kind of like, hold on, why are we inviting the evangelicals over to our house and they're reading through our books and letters and stuff saying, oh, you need to edit this out and you don't like this? I mean, at one point, Andreasen said, imagine Seventh-day Adventists going to a Methodist institution suggesting certain changes in their books. It's like they would be promptly shown the door, and rightly so. You know what I mean? So it's like, why did we invite these guys in and to tell us what we should print and what we should cut out and all that? And he didn't like how Frida just consisted of Froome, Anderson, and Reed. Like, why are three people, and then Unruh, of course, was there from time to time in the beginning, but why are three people deciding what Adventist theology is, and
that's a good point,
and deciding that for the rest of us? Yeah. So he critiqued a lot of things. The two big theological things were definitely the atonement and the nature of Christ, but just the idea of these Adventist evangelical conferences, he did not agree with. And he also wrote to the General Conference president demanding that he fire Roy Anderson and W.E. Reed on charges of a conspiracy against God and his people.
Yeah. That's big.
I'm not sure in working policy where that's a charge you can bring, but I mean, those are loaded words, aren't they? I mean, those are words designed to rouse people. It's one thing if you want to remove a prime minister, or we want to remove a president. It's one thing to say he's not good at his or her job. It's another thing to say treason and conspiracy. I mean, that's using that kind of language enough, you might provoke somebody to do more than just vote against them. They might say, well, we got to kind of physically take them out. I just finished listening to this great podcast on the assassination of John F. Kennedy, so that's in my head now.
I'm a fan of that topic.
You're a fan of killing Kennedy?
No, of the topic.
Oh, the topic. It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. During lockdown,
it's really interesting.
During lockdown, I had a podcast where on a separate Facebook group.
So
I'm interested in all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and you're all right. What I'm saying isn't germane to that particular situation, but all I'm saying is, like, if the way we talk about each other, if it dehumanizes, or we say they're traitors or they're enemies of the people, like that kind of language, if you do it enough, can spark people to take stronger action. You know what I mean?
And his language permeated the next generation, permeated the Concerned Brethren, permeated the Standish Brothers, and I can see that kind of, what kind of language would you call it? It's
apocalyptic,
provocative, and also, again, from a very strong sense of a higher moral ground, but it seems to have permeated right up to the present time of the traditional Adventists. Like even yesterday in Thunder's interview, a lot of people in the comments who were more on the side of Andreasen, shall we say, were speaking like Andreasen, like those kind of quotes you just mentioned.
Yeah. And certainly there's a time for everything, and I think there's a time, if you're talking about Luther, his situation, there's a time for extreme language when you're in extreme circumstances. Or if you're talking about Adventism in antebellum America with slavery, there's a time to not be polite and considerate. There's a time to be like, we need to free the slaves now, today. We're not worried about kind of shaking hands and making a gradual process. We want abolition at this moment. So there's
maybe there was a time for that. If people hadn't spoken up, Adventism would look very different now.
So obviously he saw this as an emergency. He saw this as an emergency, and it was appropriate to deploy that kind of language to rouse people.
Was it an emergency? What do you think? Was it an actual emergency? If you're thinking of theology and the actual belief, to me, Andreasen's Adventism is more like Ellen White's Adventism than Des
Oh.
Ford's Adventism.
Well, I guess that might be true. I don't know. I guess it depends on what theology we're talking about. Sanctuary theology, yes, definitely.
Yes.
But I think in some respects, Ellen White was probably closer to Ford on some, overall on the gospel.
Interesting.
I think she was more Christ-centered in some respects than maybe Andreasen was. But it's hard to answer because I still, to this day, after studying so much about QOD and the conferences, I still have a hard time placing my finger on it in terms of, like, if it's almost like if you would have deleted it all, they had no conferences, there's no QOD, I still think we would have ended up where we end up today. I think the problem is people were not aware of the secularizing of the Western world, and so they looked kind of for scapegoats. Like, because you perceive the influences that people are kind of not going to church maybe anymore. You have this rock and roll music coming out, and this, over time, not so much in the 50s, but when you get in the 60s, obviously the world changes quite dramatically culturally, and you're looking for scapegoats. Well, it's because we don't have prayer in schools. It's because people aren't giving tithe. It's because we're not as committed as we used to be. That's why the world is changing. And I think now we have hindsight and say, it really isn't because there's no prayer in schools. It's really not because we don't have Christian leaders. Like, secularism is its own thing. And I think if you study it, you realize it started with the Reformation and it has just slowly been working its way. And now it's accelerating. I don't think QOD caused that problem. Now, I do have faults personally with the process. I do agree that when you get 3 people on one side and 3 people on the other, you cannot possibly speak for the groups you represent.
Yeah.
You're never going to build a consensus. Like, there's almost no way when you walk away from that table and announce what you've decided that you're going to get mass acceptance.
Yeah.
You've got to find a way to bring stakeholders into that conversation. But that's why I feel like I have a hard time getting a handle on it, because it's such a weird, wonky situation.
When I talk to my Adventist sociologist friends, Rick Ferre is one of them. Dr. Rick Ferre, great guy, very humble, laid back musician as well. Now retired, written several books. You might want to check him out. But he views a lot of this and this channel from a sociological perspective, and I think would agree with what you're saying there, that maybe this kind of thing just happens anyway, and there's more than just one little sparky moment, even though that moment is a spark and relevant and worth talking about for sure.
Yes,
but maybe it's hard to put your finger on because there's so many human sociological things at play that are going to happen anyway. Like, there was going to be a Martin Luther at one point, there was going to be a Kennedy, there was going to be any of these kind of inspirational people that seem to bring about change. They're probably just going to happen anyway. We're just all pawns in the chess game of life.
And certainly, I mean, our decisions and behavior matters. But life is bigger than any one of our, and so I think, we have a tendency as human beings to boil everything down to human-sized problems. If only I read the Bible more, my kids would be in the church. And it's like, maybe not. But reading the Bible more and saying that, that's something I can control, right? So it helps me feel like I have control over the destiny of my children, spiritually speaking, by if I do this or do that. And it's like, and you may do all the right things. You may be a great parent and love the Lord, and they see that, and they still may walk away. And you can't control everything. And I think so. Back to the thing, why I say it's weird and wonky is because it first of all, it started by accident. This was not planned. It was not designed. It was not even that thought through. But because of the dynamics of both groups, they couldn't bring more stakeholders into the conversation because they couldn't publicize that they were even having a conversation. for fear that there would be so many fundamentalists, really, like in both sides, that would throw so much fire on it that you could never have a conversation. So in order to even have the conversation, they had to keep it secret or relatively secret. But then if you do that, that means it's even less likely to be accepted because people are going to look at it like a conspiracy.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, but if you don't keep it secret, then it's unlikely that the popular pressure will prevent you from even having the conversation to begin with. So it's like, it was just like this lose-lose situation. Any which way you go seems like a bad end. And so they chose the path that it's like, well, at least we can meet, at least we can talk, and at least we can write something and hope for the best. And
then it kind of was very organic after that, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
Imagine if Barnhouse had a letter from Andreasen and had said to Walter Martin, hey, go on down there and check out Andreasen and find out about Adventism. QOD would definitely have never happened, and Adventism would not have been accepted into the mainstream.
Yeah. Certainly. Now, Andreasen and Barnhouse did communicate later on, but yes, it wasn't that first conversation.
Yeah.
For sure. Because Andreasen felt, I don't feel like I'm getting the straight truth from my church leaders, so I'm going to write to Barnhouse and ask him. And one of the other issues he was concerned about was the evangelicals were annoyed with the Adventist missionaries for proselytizing. We're trying to get them to convert. So, Adventist missionary somewhere in Africa and a Baptist missionary somewhere in Africa. The Adventists would not just try to reach the native population. They would also try to convert the Baptist missionaries.
Yes.
And that annoyed to no end the other Protestant and Catholic missionaries in these regions. Because they're like, hey, there's like 4 of us, trying to cover a whole country. Can we just work together and not try to get each other?
Yeah. Adventists notoriously are known for doing that.
Yep. And so for Barnhouse, it was important that Adventists be able to keep doing that. And so he had heard that the Adventists and the evangelicals had reached an agreement that Adventists would stop doing that. And so he wrote to Barnhouse to be like, is this true? Have we given up evangelism to be friends with you, kind of a thing? And Barnhouse, we've met him in our last talk, and he's not one to suffer that kind of interrogation politely. In fact, in May of 1958, A.L. Hudson, I'm not sure if you guys are probably familiar with his work, a printer
from your podcast. That's how I learned about him.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Hudson never met a dissenting Adventist that he didn't want to promote. So he, when Robert Wieland was complaining about the church, he printed Robert Wieland stuff. And when Andreasen started complaining about the church, he printed Andreasen stuff, because in his mind, it's important for their voices to be heard and they don't get kind of buried by the church bureaucracy. I don't know that he necessarily agreed with every cause. I think he even would go on to promote Brinsmead stuff too. I think it was kind of more of a free speech thing for him. I'm sure he, and I don't know if he may have done the very same thing for Ford as well in the 70s. But anyway, so Hudson called Barnhouse, and I don't know that we have Andreasen's communication with Barnhouse necessarily. I can't remember, but Hudson took notes on the phone call. He made a transcript.
Wow.
And Barnhouse was, when he got this call from Hudson, he was very clearly annoyed by the pushback he was getting from his fellow evangelicals and even from Adventists. He was hearing Adventists who were outraged, and he's like, I'm just trying to do a good thing here. Why am I getting all this hate from everybody? It annoyed him to no end. And so this is what he told Hudson. Barnhouse told Hudson. He said, all I'm saying is that Adventists are Christians. I still think their doctrines are about the screwiest of any group of Christians in the world. I believe this beyond any question. In fact, the doctrine of the investigative judgment is the most blatant, face-saving proposition that ever existed to cover up the debacle of the failure of Christ to come in 1844. When the 2 men walked through the cornfield and suddenly one of them struck his head and said, why, Christ did come. This is ridiculous, asinine nonsense. He said, 100 years ago, the Adventists were practically all illiterates. And now they are becoming educated, and they know that their doctrine will not hold the light of exegesis.
That's classic.
Yeah.
And Barnhouse said that to Hudson on the phone.
Which of course Hudson is very happy to talk about.
Oh yeah.
Like this is how they look at us. They're not our friends. They disdain us. Barnhouse is clearly exasperated, and he if he was going to print that, I mean, it's no different. It's not like he's saying something different than he printed. He clearly disagrees with Adventist doctrine, but if he was going to print it, he probably would have worded that a little bit nicer, just a little bit, not a lot. Saying that 100 years ago Adventists were practically all illiterate is
yeah. And he possibly hadn't given permission to Hudson to be transcribing. It's like an illegal recording.
I don't know. I don't know if he did or not, but that's so obviously we're having problems here. So anyways, Andreasen at first though, there was some sympathy with Andreasen, but the more he went on, he kind of defeated his own cause, because he just kept making more and more aggressive, statements, and that alienated church leaders, and that brought other people to condemn him. Heppenstall was one of them. He complained about Andreasen, saying, you pick on any word from any talk or article. No one is safe anymore with you. It's George McCready Price. I don't know if you guys have talked about him and creationism much in your podcast, but he's an older gentleman at this point as well, and he complains too about Andreasen. And he's conservative, as well. Very staunch defender of young Earth creationism. Kind of helped pioneer that idea among Christians. And he's tired of Andreasen's constant complaining also. Chairman of the White Estate, same thing. He's the one who wrote a 27-page paper comparing Andreasen's statements to what Ellen White wrote, obviously not in Andreasen's favor. And even compared Andreasen, what he was writing now, to what he had written in the past, showing contradiction as well. And so everyone just kind of wanted Andreasen to chill out at some point. It's getting to be too much. And, when Martin's book, The Truth About Seventh-day Adventism, came out in 1960, again, that was just kind of fresh fuel for Andreasen's fire. And so about a year after that, less than a year after that, maybe, on April 6, 1961, the General Conference voted to suspend Andreasen's credentials as a minister. And this was a real blow to Andreasen, like a real personal blow. And I think that's a hard thing maybe for younger people to understand or sympathize with. But for these old ministers, like, your credentials that the church had given you, like, this is a kind of a point of pride.
Yes.
And to take them away from somebody was
massive.
A sign of we no longer have faith in you, right? Today it's different with younger pastors, because it's like, you tell me I can't be a pastor anymore. Forget you. I'll just go get a better job.
I've had two conservative pastors that I know and keep in touch with that have had the same thing happen to them, and they have gone publicly, oh yeah, let's just do other things, but they are grieving deeply inside that's happened. Yeah. They yearn to be back in the fold. They see that credential as being, the biggest star in their crown in many ways. So maybe that's human nature. Once you've been given a certain award or accolade or title, to have it removed, it might be one thing to go, I'm going to remove it myself, but to have someone else remove it for you is quite painful.
Yes, it is, because it represents that the entire denomination has confidence in you. Yeah. And to have that removed, it's like, we no longer trust you as a denomination.
Yeah, it's big. Yeah, I think I mentioned to you that recently Adventists still get me to do gigs and music for their programs, but I no longer have my name on the posters and the advertising. And when that started happening a few months ago, and I thought about you mentioning about this in your podcast about Andreasen getting his credentials removed, and I thought, boy, there is a bit of a sting there. It's like you're kind of by an institution being made invisible. And so I'm sure it took a lot out of him. And he was older by then too, wasn't he? He was well into his 80s.
Yes, well into his 80s. Yep. You're right. And, I mean, this is somebody who had written books, who had been a professor. It's like, you trusted me to teach generations. You trusted me to be president of a school. And now, that hasn't earned me anything. Now, you say they can't put your name on the poster, and earlier you say, no longer an Adventist. But I don't believe that at all because of the Weet-Bix. I think that you're still, even just that one little thread, you're still connected. I consider you one of us, Peter.
I had Weet-Bix for breakfast this morning.
See what I'm saying?
It's the best meal. Yeah, it's the number. I don't know if you know, but it's the number one cereal in Australia. Number one selling cereal.
Yes. Yeah, and when you can be that gigantic organization and not pay taxes, it's a huge advantage. It's fantastic.
Hey, I don't want to go down that path because I want free Weet-Bix for promoting. You may not realize this, Matthew, but I'm actually 97 years old because of Weet-Bix. I look a lot younger.
I mean, if that isn't approval of the Adventist health message, I don't know what is. I don't know. If maybe Weet-Bix is the best example, but certainly not Little Debbie at here in the States.
Yes. Yeah.
The irony of Adventism. It is such a messy group of people, like just full of so many idiosyncrasies and contradictions and delightful. Some of them quite delightful.
Yes. We digress.
All right, so we digress. We got to keep getting our Weet-Bix in there because I'm trying to get Sanitarium to sponsor these videos. And if I keep mentioning them,
you're after the sponsorship for you as well. We could do a combined deal. I'll chat to them. I know a lot of the. I went to college with I went to college with the CEO.
Did you really?
Yeah.
You were nice to him, right? Like this should work out in your favor.
Yeah, we're good friends.
Well, call him up and be like, look, I'm going to open every video just eating a bowl of Weet-Bix, and then I'll put the box, in the background somewhere so it can be seen. All right. So you can leave theologically, Peter, but not economically. It's we need to sponsor this channel. Okay. So Andreasen loses his credentials. It was a huge blow to him. He felt that very deeply, as I was saying. But the fight wasn't over. I mean, he was asking the people reading, he had been sending out, somebody in the chat earlier alluded to his letters to the church. That was a series. He did that, and he did a series called The Atonement. And there's kind of like newsletters with his criticisms of QOD and the church. He would disseminate them. And he started asking for money at some point, saying, hey, give me $1 and I'll send you future ones. Like he thought he was building something. We're going to build a movement here. I think Andreasen. At one point, if I'm not mistaken, Andreasen.
Yeah. But he did. Get like ironically, he did. Like every
not in his lifetime.
Not in his lifetime, but he did. Like I've traced every single independent Adventist ministry has some connection, more than 6 degrees, even less than that, back to the Standish Brothers, back to Concerned Brethren, back to Andreasen.
Yeah. Right. So he wanted to keep fighting on, but he dies. Spoiler alert to anybody who's surprised by that. Dies February 19th, 1962. And
when did he die?
It's February 19th, 1962.
Wow. 2 months before I was born.
It was about a month. 2 months before you were born.
Yeah, to the day.
Well, I guess
almost.
Did his spirit leave him, and then it came to you, and
came into me. I felt it as
you're reincarnated Andreasen.
As I was floating around the universe, in between those 2 months, deciding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm really going to get my heresy trial. Okay. So in January of that year, like a month before he died, he wrote a pamphlet called "Shooting the Watchdog." Which is what he was accusing the church of doing to him. Said the fight is not finished. In hindsight, we're like, dude, you got like 3 weeks left to live. Like maybe the fight is finished, for you.
Yeah, for you,
But,
yeah. Yeah.
of course, he didn't know that. But in hindsight. So anyways, he dies about a month later. Weeks later, after his death on March 1, the General Conference returned his credentials to his wife and put his name back in the yearbook.
Really?
And I think, yeah, it was not something like people have to understand about the dynamic here. The church was not angry with Andreasen. They just wanted him to shut up.
Imagine if they'd been generous and given that to him just before he died. How cruel. He would have loved that.
That would have been nice. Yeah, he would have loved that. And he had a good conversation shortly before he died with the church as well. But, the bureaucracy to vote to reinstate credentials, I'm sure it takes a little bit of time. I don't think that they were opposed to returning it. They didn't want to take them. They just kept telling him, the conversation, we're truncating it here. The conversation that went off for years, like they were saying, well, just come to the General Conference and talk to us about, you can share your feelings here. And every time there seemed like there would be peace, like that he would be satisfied, just something else happened. Like in one time, he's like, okay, I'll come talk, but I want copies of the recordings of our conversation. And for the General Conference, it was like, no, because we don't know what you're going to do with them. And so then that broke down. And now there's like another round of him being upset with the church. And that would go on for a while. Then there'd be a quiet period. And it seemed like they might have peace again. But it seems like there was always something that messed it up. And so the church didn't want to remove his credentials. They just wanted him to stop, yelling that they have gone liberal, and abandoned Adventist theology and stuff. Like they just wanted him to calm down. And it just seems like everything that they did just riled him up. And sometimes they said things that could easily be misinterpreted. There was a comment about his retirement, his sustentation, they called it back then. And so that, anybody who's ever criticized the Adventist church as an employee is afraid that they're going to lose their retirement, which legally they cannot. You earned it. It's yours. But there's always that fear. And so, like this gets misinterpreted by Andreasen, and he thinks, oh, you're going to take away my retirement. Well, then I'm going to sue you. And so that just kind of burns whatever little bridge they had built. So anyways, they were not eager. It was not like good riddance to him. We're happy he's gone. It was very sad for church leaders. They didn't want any of this to happen. They held him in a lot of esteem because, he's kind of an elder statesman in the church, and they weren't trying to snub him. They weren't trying to. And so anyways, he did write something, which I do think I quoted in my podcast, that he wanted read at his funeral. And it was a very unifying statement. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he urges. Anyways, it was a very nice statement. We'll just put it that way. And just life and love are wonderful, and I've had a life full of them. That kind of stuff.
Right.
At least.
Are those letters and bits and pieces that he wrote and collated? So have they been collated into a book? I know when I listened to your podcast on QOD, on the Adventist History podcast, I went looking after that to try and find, but didn't appear to be. You could find all his different. I think I don't know. Someone may have sent me some of his letters and whatnot. I did find things online, but I couldn't find a kind of one-stop ML Andreasen compilation of this time period.
Yeah, that's true. And part of the reason for that, part of the reason for that is because, so a lot of these letters revolve around QOD, including some of Andreasen's, reside in archives, which people are free to go look at, quote. But often the agreement you make with the archive is that you don't just publish, photocopies of it online. So, you can take the text, I presume, I don't know. It depends on where you're going, but, and maybe, and that doesn't stop people from having done it in the past, but it would be nice to have readers. It would be nice to have like a subject, like, I don't know. I think kind of, that's sort of what Jillian is doing with her Glacier View books.
Yes.
Like you're just taking things that were written. It's not comprehensive. She would be publishing an awful lot of books. She was trying to be comprehensive, getting both sides, getting all the participants and what they wrote about it and all that. But yes, it would be nice. We need that. We need people to kind of gather materials and make them available in
Yeah.
one location.
Yes.
It's a bit of a hunt because sometimes we have, if we're researching a subject, we have to go to Loma Linda to look at stuff.
Yeah.
Some stuff is online. You have to go to General Conference for some stuff. Like it's a hunt.
Mm.
And anyways, so yeah, he Andreasen eventually dies, and this becomes a thing when Martin publishes his book in 1960. That just starts the conversation all over again. In the evangelical world and in the Adventist world, and there's different responses to it. I think it kind of dies down a bit in the 70s, and obviously for the Adventists, they got distracted by, I don't know, other things going on in the church. But they quietly let Questions on Doctrine go out of print.
What year did it actually go out of print?
I was trying to figure that out. I didn't have a lot of time to look. I don't know, but it was definitely out of print by the 80s. So my guess is sometime in the 70s, maybe late 60s. I don't know. Maybe George says something in the introduction to this version of Questions on Doctrine, or maybe Carl knows off the top of his head. Carl is saying in the comments here that the Letters to the Church was published by Layman Publishing. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I know I found some stuff online. I think I found the Letters to the Church stuff online. You can go to archive.org and you can find a lot of stuff there. The challenge is you just don't find everything.
Yeah.
And so, but maybe what Carl is talking about here, I don't know if he says file. Went out of print in 1974. Okay. So Carl's point here is Questions in Doctrine went out of print in 1974 when Volume 7A came out. And that's something Bill Johnson is going to say in that Ankerberg interview by saying when he was asked why is QOD out of print, he'd say, well, we had something else come out that kind of replaced it.
I see. Right.
Like we no longer needed it anymore, which,
so
we can talk about that some other time.
So what happened next? Because this area where you're saying not much happened to do with QOD, it's taken out of print, it's replaced with another version of it that didn't really carry much impetus or weight as far as the public was concerned. But all these threads of this new theology began to emerge in that time period, and I would say, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that perhaps because of QOD, because of the Adventism being seen in a more positive evangelical light, the likes of Cottrell, Ford, you mentioned, just mental blank, list a few of some of these new theology guys that were starting to emerge. Heppenstall, these guys were emerging because the landscape was now more open to accepting a more evangelical Adventism to rise up. Would that be a direct result, or at least quite influential because of QOD?
Yeah. Again, I don't know that it's because of QOD or it's because, obviously, like you look at the 60s, hugely traumatic, the back half of the 60s, hugely traumatic to the way culture. All I'm saying is from 1960 and then you go to 1970, the Western culture's changed a tremendous amount. I would say more than any other single decade in who knows how long.
Do you think, though, if Adventism had remained more Andreasen style Adventism throughout the 60s and 70s, that the church would have grown from 1 million members in late 50s to 4 million members in the early 80s? I'm suggesting that as a direct result of this evangelical style promotion to the rest of the world, there was more of a hyper on steroids, intense opening of the doors for people to join Adventism. Even that number, I might be wrong again, but my thoughts are if it's an Andreasen style Adventism, membership increase would have happened more slowly.
It's hard to say for sure. I do think, though, in general, conservative churches are the ones that are growing more than liberal ones. I do think a more
even back
evangelical
in that
Adventism.
time. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, evangelical, like the evangelical Adventism is certainly more. It's more attractive to a larger group of people.
Mm.
But I think you get it. You run into a kind of a paradox when you get to some of these churches that are like, we're fine with evolution, homosexuality. Maybe you don't even believe God exists. It's fine. You're welcome here. Like they're open to everybody, but there's also no compelling reason. Obviously,
Yes.
I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just saying, like,
No,
but
it's
then
just a
why should
fact.
I join?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but so then why should I join? Like, why? Like what?
Yeah.
But churches that have stronger boundaries, they're not attractive to a large group of people. But for people that they're designed
yes.
for, they're like, yeah, okay, I see why
Yeah.
I belong there. So I feel like
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a paradox there. Like the more you
Yeah.
open up,
Yeah.
the more people, the bigger market you have, but the less people maybe are
Mm.
incentivized to buy.
Mm. Good point.
So I mean that's not, that's not entirely true. Like Roman Catholicism is a fairly, like in some respects, a fairly conservative group. I mean, you're talking about infallibility of one person. Like that's a very kind of archaic in this age of democracy, very kind of archaic belief. But a lot of people find that compelling, and they join. Biggest group. But anyways, neither here nor there. So I don't know. I don't know if the church would have stayed more conservative for longer if that would have meant less or more people joining the church. I think a lot of the growth was outside of the area where Andreasen was, and outside of the area where QOD was. So many things are arguments in Australia or America or England or wherever, but it's like, in a sense, it's so far removed from like the vast majority of where Adventists are. We argue about it. We get worked up about it. Does the rest of the world care? Does a non-English speaking part of the world care that much? Maybe they do. To what extent did they pay attention to Desmond Ford in Russia, or in I don't know, other parts of Africa or Asia? Maybe they did.
I guess for me, why I think the conversation needs a broader audience, not just for those of us like you and I that just kind of love this kind of stuff anyway, is because it's not a benign religion. It's not like, if people are born into Baptist church or Anglicans, there's problems and faults and flaws and all sorts of normal human problems. But Adventism seems to have this ability in a similar way, in my opinion, to Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, that if you're born into it or join it, it's not just a benign, this happens and stuff. There's some pretty serious things that can happen that can really affect people's mental health if they buy into some of it. And the problem is with someone like Ted Wilson, I'm not asking you to have any comment on this, but in my opinion, Ted Wilson is fostering a kind of an Adventism that I think could be mentally unhealthy for a lot of young people. But more than a benign Catholic order or a Protestant religion. Sure, there's dangers out there everywhere.
But sure. I'm not gonna say that that's not true. I do think it definitely can have that effect, but I think it really depends on where the person is at in their lives. For some people, it is like gasoline and fire putting them with Adventism. Because other people, it's like water on a hot day, because they crave structure. They crave meaning. They need that. It gives them boundaries where maybe they didn't grow up with that, or So I do think that works both ways. For some people, it can be a really unhealthy thing for them, and for other people, it can be something.
And I guess that, and I notice Vernon Clyde Lewis is watching, and he was very much involved with a local church in Sydney that I would often get invited to sing to, and I would absolutely love my gigs there. They'd be family nights, country music, bush dancing, amazing food, and the Adventism there, they wouldn't even talk about this kind of stuff. And I know that when Vernon watches, he's often like, "Why are you talking about this stuff?" And so my thoughts on the reason I think it's important to talk about is not for the members that are existing in it and can go, "Hey, I'll find my place," or "Here's a nice little Sabbath school room I can chat with my comrades," or "Hey, I'm going to go over and watch nothing but 3ABN," or whatever. There's places people can find, but people born into it or people joining to it because of the advertising, I'm concerned that there's more. As I said, it's not a benign religion. There's more places they can fall into and inadvertently have certain kind of mental health pressure put on them that I don't think they'd stumble across other than the normal kinds of flaws and faults and structures and systems of any other religion. There's something, in my opinion, that's a little bit more, got to be a little bit more, like with my daughters. I got to be, Renee goes to the school. I love the school. I love Avondale High School and Primary School. She's going to keep going right through to year 12 there. I have no criticism at all. But there's other places they could go, and I'm just constantly monitoring where they go when it comes to Adventism. And I'm a super vigilant father anyway. If they're going to the local Bunnings store or whatever, I'm always hang on, I'll just keep I'll be following them around. So I'm hyper vigilant, but I don't know. I just get this feeling there's some dangers lurking in them thar hills of Adventism that are more than the average. And again, that's why these conversations are important, because by just having them, we kind of can neutralize some of the power of it by letting people who watch know, hey, there's other options. You can go to Vernon's church in Sydney and have a great family-oriented program and community. If you want to have a more academic, scholarly approach to Adventism, go and check out some of where Fritz Guy used to go before he passed, and Larry Garrity, and those Sabbath school places, So having these conversations that seem to perhaps contain controversy and heretical things, and actually, I think, water down the notion of the polemic that Adventism sometimes falls into. And because you're an Adventist, you've got a podcast, you're a pastor, but it works for you, and by people watching this, instead of being shocked by, oh, Ellen did this or someone did that, they can find their place within Adventism. You guys say niche, some of us say niche, but so I think that's an important reason why we have these conversations.
I do too. I think, and I'm very well aware that there are aspects of Adventism, especially culturally, that are toxic. I think any pastor, I don't care what conference you're in or how conservative it is, like any pastor has come across that. Every church administrator bears scars. And maybe that's true for every Christian group. I don't know. But it's certainly true in Adventism, where you have met somebody who is just, I can share a quick story about that. When I was growing up, when I first entered the Adventist church, I grew up Catholic. When I first entered the Adventist church, there was a lady in the church there was another gentleman in the church who was overweight. And this lady walked up to him and said, "You better eat more salads because you weigh too much to be able to meet Jesus in the air when he comes." Now, obviously, that's not Adventist theology, like per se. You can see where she's coming from, the health stuff. But that, nobody teaches that. But it's like, but there's obviously something about the environment that somehow led her to think that that's an okay thing to tell somebody, which is an absolutely horrible thing to tell somebody. It's horrible. It's not biblical. It's not, strictly speaking. I mean, it's not Adventist. We don't teach that. But she felt that she was in an environment where it was safe for her to say that. And you look around, you're like, well, where were the church elders who said, "I'm so sorry that she said that. We're going to go talk with her and say that," right? But like, you bring an NIV into some churches, and someone's going to talk to you, and people pick up on that stuff. You know what I mean? People pick up on that stuff, and it absolutely exists. And like you say, there are also places where sometimes I hear these people critiquing Adventism. They're like, well, they don't have the gospel. And you're like,
Mm,
man, I'm in a situation where we love Jesus and we believe firmly that we're saved by faith alone, and it's not our Sabbath keeping, it's not our any of this other stuff. And so I'm like, I don't even know what church you're describing, because that's not my experience in Adventism where I am. Maybe
mm,
that is true in other places, and certainly many people have shared similar stories to that.
mm.
Um, but like there's plenty of non-legalistic areas of Adventism, and
Yeah,
so I appreciate what you're saying here. The dialogue you have with people can show people, yeah, there's this over here, but there's also this over
that
here.
over there. Yeah.
Um,
James Z says Adventism seems to have this drama associated with it that seems to be in the DNA of E.G. White.
yeah,
Um, but I would suggest that. By the way, Arthur and Teresa Beam are watching, and they.
yeah,
I just want to quickly just check if I've got it here.
yeah. Catholics promote faith in Christ.
And
Yeah, and that's. I'm
they've.
just gonna,
Sorry, go ahead. I missed that.
no. I was just gonna say. I mean, that's true. Like a lot of Protestants, including some Adventists, have that conception that Catholicism is purely
And
works based or
yeah,
whatever.
and they've written a great book, which I've got here somewhere in my books. It's called something like "It's Okay Not to Be an Adventist," and they left the church and became Catholic, kind of the opposite of your journey. And I think
Yeah,
that's something I'd like to be able to portray: is that it's okay to be an Adventist, and it's okay not to be an Adventist,
yeah,
and to maybe just have the dialogue. That's again why I love your podcast, the Adventist History. Make sure I'm saying it correctly. Adventist History
you got it.
podcast,
Adventist history podcast. That's good.
because you're following that path that all good historians follow, where you just here's the facts. You're allowing people to use their own brain, their own God-given brain, to decide. And
Yeah,
it concerns me that sometimes people think that, I might have a conservative person on the program or a progressive Adventist, and that has somehow will influence everybody to leave the church or
yes,
become a conservative. I think we need to give people a
yes,
little bit more, acknowledgement that their grey matter is usable and can be quite effective in just taking on
yeah,
board this stuff and then decide for yourself.
yeah. So, Elder Ted Wilson, if you're watching, come on this show. It's a safe
Oh,
place for you. I'm sure you and Peter would have
we would.
a very, it would be a very respectful conversation. And for people in the comments, I'm glad you're here. And I agree with what Peter said, that I think there's a tendency that we want Peter, or we want somebody or me doing my podcast to like represent my viewpoint. And that's only natural. But it's important for us, especially in an age. I don't know if it's happening in Australia, but we're sorting in America. People who are red or Republican are moving to counties where more red Republicans.
Yes.
That's the kind of the color associated with the party.
All heading to Florida.
Blue people are blue people are moving to blue counties. Red people are moving to red counties. As if we don't even want to live near people who have
Yeah.
different political beliefs than we do.
It's dangerous.
Or to red states, blues. Yes, and it's like
Yeah.
we're, despite the internet, despite our exposure to all these different ideas, we're choosing to close our minds to them. And I think it's important to have venues where we can have these conversations.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, let me get back to QOD.
Agreed. Yes, back to QOD. One quick Teresa or Arthur just wrote one of my last lines in the book. It's okay to be Adventist. She wrote, "It's okay to be an Adventist, and it's okay not to be an Adventist." My publisher pulled the book from his endorsement when I wouldn't remove that line. See, again, that's the kind of attitude I think that causes civil wars eventually. We polarize, and I'm trying. And what I'm not banging on about SDA&A. I'm just saying that I think what you're doing, what I'm doing, we're trying to minimize the polarization and encouraging people to do what they think is aligned with them.
Yes,
So
yes,
back
yes.
back
And,
to QOD.
Okay. Well, our Teresa may be interested to know. I used to be on a blog in the 2000s. It was called SDA to RC, Seventh Day Adventist to Roman Catholic. It was by some Adventists who had converted to Roman Catholicism. I did not write very much, but I was a member of that blog. I was supposed to represent the opposite view, Catholic to Adventist, and so it was. I think there was 2 of us that were Catholic to Adventist, and then 3 that were Adventist to Catholic, and it was supposed to be a place of dialogue. I don't know if you were. I don't know what your story is and when you became Catholic, but maybe that's something you ran across in the 2005-ish time frame. Anyways, and I hope to heavens that blog no longer exists. I think I don't know what I said, what I commented. I hope it doesn't come back to haunt me. Anyways, so okay, let's skip ahead. Let's do the Ankerberg show. Was it 1985? Was it
84? I think.
When 84? Yeah.
So
okay.
we're jumping now from 74 QOD to 84.
Yeah. Oh, let me tie it together for you, because I do think you're onto the right track here. Like the theme of Andreasen, maybe not all of his specific arguments, though certainly what we later call last generation theology does emerge out of him, and it predates him too. But he was the kind of the contemporary person who kind of packaged it in what we call last generation theology. And certainly that continues on, right? Certainly the inherent conflict between church leaders and especially, not always leaders, but often intellectuals who may be trying to lead us out to be too close to compromise with the world or to compromise with Protestantism or whatever. Like that dynamic, you're right, is always there, and it manifests itself in a number of different ways. It's not all specifically QOD, but I think that kind of conversation or that fight, that QOD didn't cause it, but precipitated that continues on and takes different forms.
Before we go to 84, I'm interested though in Andreasen definitely influenced the Concerned Brethren, Standish Brothers. They directly influenced Keith Parmenter, the SPD president here. The Neil Wilson and his crew were definitely aware of these changes, the threat, the questioning of Ellen White's authority. There's discussions between Pearson and Wilson at the time that this needs we need to draw a line in the sand here. And there's a range of events that definitely flow on from QOD through Andreasen, through the Concerned Brethren, into the American culture as well, the scholars, the academics. A rift is forming. We've got the Fords, the Heppenstalls, the Cottrells on one side. We've got the Standish Brothers, etc., on the other side. The leadership is now, instead of like they were with QOD, instead of them kind of being quite warm to Frieda and allowing that to move forward. Now the leadership is, we're gonna be stopping these guys. I'm interested in your thoughts on that important era that led to Glacier View, that has its roots back in Andreasen and QOD, because that to me is when the church split and didn't realize they'd split. That's when we have the traditional Adventist, the progressive Adventist. Again, each side has their own subsets and groups and whatever, but generally speaking, there's these two groups that were at war. Glacier View hits, Dez's credentials are soon taken away. There's a link there, and I don't think it's a tenuous one, that goes back to Andreasen, QOD, the new theology, and that tension exists to this day because it hasn't truly been addressed by leadership.
Yeah, and again, taking a wider view, that tension exists here in the Southern Baptist Convention too. I think it exists in a lot of places, right? So you have the conflict here. I don't presume that everybody in Australia is always following what's going on in America, but with Russell Moore, who was Perfect. Well, perfect. But Russell Moore in the Southern Baptist Convention, he's critical of when Donald Trump was president, saying, evangelicals should not just blindly follow him. He takes a ton of heat from his group, and it's not just him. It's not just Russell Moore. It's also Beth Moore, no relation. Very popular female Bible teacher. And
fractures and splits in churches over these
yes,
things happen. That's not worrying
yeah.
me. But I want to look at the Adventist one.
Yeah. Understood. I'm just saying this is part of a larger trend within evangelicalism, within Adventism, within other churches of, how should we relate to either other Christians, the world around us, and some obviously are more open than others, and that's where that fault line is.
And that's a very good point to make, actually.
So obviously with Ford, he's quoting scholars on Hebrews and on these other topics related to sanctuary very favorably, as if we should listen to their scholarship. And, in a way that traditionally Adventists, at best in the 1800s, it's not that they were unaware. Certainly they quoted these different writers. But there was never a sense of like, we should listen to these scholars. That just was not a concern.
Yes.
But we have this growth of this scholar class.
Yeah.
Not just in Adventism and other churches too. Because Adventists, by the 70s, so many more of them are getting PhDs, not at Adventist institutions, because you couldn't offer PhDs if you didn't have faculty that had some, right? You had to go somewhere else to get them and then come back. And so now we've had several generations of people getting doctorates. They're learning, they're being exposed to ideas from outside the Adventist bubble. And so that's why in the late 60s, that's who do you have? You have young professors, Don McAdams, Ron Numbers, Roy Branson. You have these like young, educated, highly trained people who are interested in using their craft, what they were trained to do in Adventism. So yes, this is creating that tension too, right? I don't think you really had that in the 50s. It was not a kind of an educational gap between Andreasen and Froome. I mean, they were, they're kind of in the same ballpark. But you have that gap now between, what is it? Pearson, what did he do? He went to Southern as well, but I think he only went for like 2 years or something.
Yeah.
So you have him, and then you have people with PhDs.
Yeah.
Who are, speaking in non-Adventist universities. They were trained there. They're respected there. So now you have that kind of fear that these intellectuals are leading us astray, because we can't control where they got their education anymore and how they practice their discipline. So yeah, that gets added to the mix in the 70s as well. That complicates this whole thing. And I think you've probably covered the Pearson era in the general.
Yeah.
What Gill writes in his Ostriches and Canaries book. If your listeners are familiar with that book, it's a very good chronicle of the Pearson years.
Yes, great book.
And so that's a deep dive into this stuff. But yes, there's concern, not just this basic, like, how do we relate to the other Christians in our midst, to the evangelicals, but how do we relate to these ideas that are coming from the world about how to do source criticism and all of these sort of things, and can we apply that to Ellen White? Is that okay? So you have these generational things, because you're having a younger generation grow up. So now it's an age gap thing as well, where they grew up with a different kind of music. They grew up with expectations regarding civil rights. They grew up with a different, kind of that energy that came out of the 60s of like, we want to change the world. We're tired of this kind of the stale square. Somebody described Richard Nixon as just like the epitome of a square. He was like the most square person you could get. Whereas, Kennedy was cool and young and fresh. So you have that tension too. So, again, you have all of these things that are coming into play. The world is getting more complicated. And I feel bad even saying this stuff, because I'm only speaking of what I've read and studied, and I'm sure there are plenty of folks who are listening who remember it. So I'm not trying to tell you what you experienced.
And there was the big 70s gospel revival and music revival, as you talk about. And
Yes.
Adventists in the late 60s were very much opening up to that. Bob Wolfgram, Genelevich, Lowell Tarling over here in Australia, Jim Johansson with his preaching. This kind of gospel Jesus revival was really starting to happen. That was starting to influence a lot of this as well. Yeah.
Certainly in the Vietnam War and Watergate as well, about how we relate to authority and whether we can trust our leaders. That puts a dent in things.
Yeah. So with all that
how do we know
said,
not...
and with all that said, and placing this into that context, which is, I'm so glad you've done it, because I can sometimes get tunnel visioned, forget the world. This is what was happening. Boom, boom, boom. To, Andreasen, QOD, boom, boom, boom. The Concerned Brethren, Desford, Glacier View. So we've got a broader setting now for all of that. But what was the thread going through to Glacier View? What are your thoughts on how QOD influenced Glacier View?
Hold on. You got to get me back a third time for Glacier View. We can.
I'd love that.
I feel like if we open that door, we got to go through it.
I would love that. Let's do it. Well,
let me finish my episodes, and then we can talk about it.
Good idea. Let's pin that era, but I guess it does relate to what we're about to say with John Ankerberg and 1984, because that whole interview is Walter Martin suddenly going, man, I think you guys hoodwinked us. And in some ways, and I chatted to Bill Johnson about this. He was not prepared for what he termed as being quite an angry attack on him. Whereas when nowadays we know that's just a strong debater. And Adventists are very soft. So no offense to him at all, but most Adventists apologists are very soft. And particularly the leaders, they run to the hills. They don't like any kind of public platform that they can't script. So I shouldn't just say all Adventist apologists, but if you're an Adventist leader, sorry, you're fairly soft. You can be hard on people, and you can come across with that kind of dominance. I'm not saying you're not a dominant person, but when it comes to having a discussion about things, unless it's scripted or controlled by you, you're just not good at sort of answering in a kind of conversational way. And I think, Bill Johnson admitted this, that he just wasn't ready for what was about to happen. But away he went on the show. So share with us your thoughts on that.
I think the challenge, this is a whole wider issue, but the challenge often is, like, administrators are not always theologians, and theologians are usually, at least in the Adventist church, seem kind of reticent to get into debates. Now, as I'm sure you know, Adventists were criticized in the 1800s for being too aggressive in debates. So apparently we overcorrected.
And even people like George Burnside, like some of these Concerned Brethren types, I pored over his 1959 Tivoli Theatre, Christchurch, New Zealand. I think there's 22 sermons night after night. He's there, packed 1,000 people a night at this Tivoli Theatre. And I took on the project of restoring those reel-to-reel tapes, and we made them available.
Cool.
But look, to be honest, I don't even know where they are. We sold the whole series. We didn't do it for money. We did it because I felt like George Burnside needed to be heard. Isn't that funny? And I stick up for Des Ford because I think he needs to be heard. But these guys could definitely debate, and even to the days of Des Ford, there were some incredible debates and strong. So I'm not saying all Adventist leaders have been, but I'm saying since Glacier View, there's a softness in Adventist leadership, because they just won't converse with the real world unless it's scripted. So if we've had 45 years of soft leadership.
I can't say anything. I'm not an
Sorry,
administrator. I script all of my episodes. So
opinion on that. Back to Ankerberg.
Yeah.
Back to Ankerberg.
Okay, so I mean, I'll say this for Bill Johnson. I have a feeling, and you've talked to him, I haven't, but I have a feeling he came expecting a discussion, and Martin is a very excellent debater, and I feel like that's just his style. And so I feel like there's just, especially, and I will say this because I don't know that I don't know how well I would have done either, because it's not, Ankerberg himself is not a neutral party.
No.
He's not facilitating a discussion, and so he'll sometimes pile it on and they can feel like a 2-on-1. But with that said, yes, I definitely watched this. I watched this video and I don't know that anybody's proud of it.
I really like, no, he wasn't. And he mentions that. I said at one point, and I think you did well in this particular, and he said, which part? Can you tell me where? And I was meaning that he was at least good at going back to the, here's our 27 fundamentals, and this, whether someone says it in this book over here or that article over there, these are our church's fundamental statements. And I think he has done so much good in the world. When I call these leaders soft, that doesn't mean I don't think I've done good things. And I'm, boy, who am I? Who am I to judge?
Listen, Elder Wilson, come on the show and debate Peter. Like, prove that we're not soft.
Yes. Because he doesn't come across as a softy leader. He's very strong with, but
I think
he wouldn't come on the show because it's not scripted. He has no control over it.
Oh, look. He went on the what's that other Adventist podcast, Seeking What They Sought. And they had Miles on their podcast too. But that wasn't a debate, obviously. But he went on there. It's not, he didn't know what they were going to ask him.
Yeah.
Anyways, but yeah, like, why would I don't know. I'm certainly not of the temperament. Like, I don't want to go debate with people. That's just not my temperament. I enjoy writing, and I don't mind disagreeing with people. I don't mind saying, I think that's unfair or whatever. I don't mind having strong opinions. I don't have any interest personally in
I guess debate's the wrong word. I'm meaning this format that you are engaging right now. It confirms that you are not a softie, because you're sharing your views. Yeah. You're sharing your views. There's critical comments. There's positive comments flowing down the side. I just love. And look, if some Adventist leaders are watching and they're offended by what I've said, I say it with such ease. I'm not even trying to be offensive. But just come on the program. Yeah. And many have.
His heresy trial before mine, please. I want to have a chance to speak at his. Then you can speak at mine. It's fine. Okay, so. So Bill Johnson, who was the editor of the he went on Ankerberg. He was the editor of the Adventist Review, for those who may not know. So obviously it puts him in a position where he should know about what Adventists believe, right? He's the one making sure that the flagship magazine gets out and it's representative of Adventist theology. He's very clear in this video that it's not, I can't remember what the distinction he makes. It's not the official organ of the church, but it is, what was it? He made a distinction that basically the review is not the mouthpiece of the world church, but it is the official publication, the flagship publication of the church. So it doesn't mean that everything that's published in it is representative of what the General Conference wants people to believe or what all Adventists believe. So that's a distinction he makes at some point. And look, watching this is kind of hard. It's hard for me to watch. I think it's, Martin asks 3 questions of church leaders. He says, one is, do you still hold the QOD? And the church leaders answered yes. And the reason why he's asking this question, the reason I think why this whole conversation even happened on Ankerberg's show, is due to the fact that Martin said he had received hundreds of letters from Adventists saying they had been fired for merely teaching what QOD was teaching. And I think what that means is they were probably Fordites in some way, shape, or form, because I think that was Ford's defense too. One of his defenses was, I'm just teaching what QOD taught. It's nothing new, which of course is not an endorsement for QOD to the traditional minded Adventists. That does not help them love the book more. Let's just put it that way. that just kind of confirms in their mind that, see, it is a departure from what Adventists have traditionally believed. But whatever. So, so to me, when Martin says he received hundreds of letters from Adventists who were disfellowship, fired, or felt pressured to leave because they believed in QOD, for him, that's like, oh gosh, then that thing we did in the 1950s was for nothing because the church is now repudiating QOD. And for the church's side, as Johnson explains it, we're not repudiating QOD. We're repudiating, maybe that's too strong of a word, but the beef is with Ford's take on the investigative judgment. He's denying one of our 27. The funny part is he's like the 27 fundamental beliefs, like the things that were voted in months before Glacier View. Yes, those historic standards of what we believe that just got here.
Say, sorry to interrupt, but I'll forget otherwise. But then to say that at Glacier View, the majority of the leaders agreed with the traditional stance, it was not true. The majority agreed with the consensus document, and in my second interview after he's retired, he agreed with that and confirmed that was true. So I don't know what was going through his mind at that point, but he was definitely not wanting to say anything that would be seen as detrimental. For him, it must have been like walking on a hot tin roof. And Walter Martin did not want him to escape that journey.
No. Martin asked, does the church still hold the QOD, and why did QOD go out of print? Okay, so the church said, yes, we still hold the QOD. The answer of why did it go out of print, as I mentioned earlier, Johnson's answer was, we now have volume 7A. And for those who don't know, volume 7A is part of this SDA Bible commentary, the original one. We actually have a new Bible commentary that's coming out the last 8 years or so. But the original Adventist Bible commentary in the 50s. So volume 7A, which came out in the 70s, so this was a process, has Ellen White's comments, basically like the ones used in QOD on the atonement, on the nature of Christ, on his deity, on righteous by faith, like it basically on all these kind of the controversial stuff in QOD. So it's this volume full of Ellen White comments. So that's his point. It's like, well, we don't need QOD anymore because we got all these Ellen White comments on some of the same subjects. Which I think personally I find a little disingenuous, because QOD was about a lot more than the atonement. It was about a lot more than the nature of Christ. Those were just, parts of QOD, the controversial bits to be sure, but not the whole story. So, but also, I think in defense of Johnson on that question, so that's my critique of it. I think QOD provided something that volume 7A did not. But in defense of Johnson, I will say, look, QOD is not a systematic theology of Adventist belief. It was an answer to a few dozen questions that one person asked in the 1950s. Like, I don't think the church is under any obligation to keep reprinting those answers forever in that same format. Now, it would be nice if maybe that was folded into a fuller treatment of Adventist theology that the church could publish and say, here's an explanation of what we believe, and include, these comments in QOD as well. But, again, it's a very historically located book, right? It was Walter Martin, of course, with his people, Cannon and Barnhouse, formulated these questions. The Adventist Church answered them. Like, those may not be the same questions people are asking in 2023. I just from the historical side of things, I want everything to be preserved. So I do hope that it's still around. But but I can understand why the church is not going to keep printing it forever. So I kind of feel both ways about that. The letting QOD go out of print. It is available online as a PDF in case anybody's wondering. You can also probably still buy this edition, and so anybody who wants access to it can get it. Now, the middle question Martin asked was, do you regard the interpretations of Ellen White of the Bible to be infallible? This is a tougher thing. And I think some of the most awkward moments in that conversation between Martin and Johnson emerge from this. And I think this is where Adventists often get accused of being mealy-mouthed and speaking out of both sides of their mouth and not being clear. And I think part of the reason why is this is going to sound like a put down, and I don't really mean it that way. Adventists are not really theologically minded people. We don't sit around reading Karl Barth. We don't sit around interacting with Calvin's institutes. And I know this bothers especially Reformed Christians because they are much more theologically informed. They know when these ecumenical creeds came out, and they're familiar with Calvin, and they're familiar with Jonathan Edwards, whoever else, right? They're more engaged historically. They're more engaged theologically. And Adventists are not. Like it's not that we don't do theology. It's not that we're not interested per se. I mean, obviously the Sabbath and State of the Dead. There's a lot of theological argumentation about those topics. But like theology as a topic, Adventists just don't, as a whole, don't really care and never really have cared. So I think when we get cornered by somebody, especially in the past, I mean, today there's a lot of very fine Adventist scholars doing these biblical studies, and so I'm not trying to take that away from them. But sometimes when Adventists get cornered about this stuff, we really struggle to answer because it's not how we conceive of things. Like we don't. I think it's a very good question. Don't get me wrong. I think Martin is asking a very good question about Ellen White and the Bible. But I think the challenge is Adventists were trying to communicate something that was at least very, very complicated, because you think this woman was a prophet who obviously was inspired. But what was inspired? Was her shopping list inspired?
Yes.
Was her letters to her kids inspired? And how do you know what's inspired and what not? Well, also, every time she said "I saw" or "I was shown," is that an I can see why people think that way, but maybe not every time. It was like I could walk up to somebody and be like, "I see that I was wrong." I'm not claiming revelation. I'm just saying I realize. So maybe not every time Ellen White says "I see" or "I saw" is she claiming some kind of vision or whatever. So I think Adventists generally, even today, although it's better now than it was, have not really had a rigorous conversation about Ellen White and inspiration, to the point where we've mined that, we've had that conversation among ourselves, and now we can talk about it with people on the outside. And I think that's part of the problem, so that when we get cornered on a show and interrogated about it, we kind of flip around a little bit, because to what extent should Bill Johnson answer for all Seventh-day Adventists, right? This is he's trying to avoid doing this in the show, but then it just sounds like, well, you're being unwilling, you're dissembling, you're refusing to give a straight answer. And I think it's because he realizes we really haven't talked this through. It's kind of like if somebody at church corners me and saying, what are you doing Wednesday night? Do you want to go do this? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I think I'm free, but I got to check with my wife. And then I don't know if the kids have piano. Like, it sounds like I'm trying to get out of it, but really it's like, I didn't have this conversation with my wife about her schedule this week. I need to go have that conversation. Then I'll come back to you and I'll give you a clear answer. Yeah. And so Adventism is avoided for the most part. And this is what that recent, in October of this year, that recent conference of some Adventist scholars, including Gill and George Knight and Eric Andreasen and others, they gathered together and said, look, we got to talk about Ellen White. And
this is the recent one that just happened. Did you go along to that? Oh, so you were there.
Do you think I got invited to that? That's very flattering. I appreciate that.
Wow. I would have thought you would certainly
I should get invited to that. Yeah. Thank you. Eric Andreasen, just call me for the next one, please. But I mean, they want to have this conversation, and I think Denis Fortin, my old boss, he was there, and he explained a little bit more about it. So did Jonathan Butler, and they explained more about it. And I think Ron Graybill was there too on Adventist Today. They had a conversation on a video there this last Sabbath.
I watched part of that. Were there any representatives of the Andreasen side?
I don't believe so. But it's kind of
that there's the room of this topic, for a metaphor, hasn't been totally mined yet. You're suggesting that kind of conference is a good step forward. Is it an even better step forward if both sides have that kind of conference, or is that just going to cause a storm?
Okay. Look, if I could wave my magic wand, I think Adventist should have that conference, and I think it should be both the, because let's be honest, the people there were educators, they were kind of intellectuals for the most part, and I think that they should have that conversation, and I think that they should have that conversation with the, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, the Andreasen side of the church. Like once they get together and talk, let's have our administrators, Bible teachers, pastors, whoever, who accept that Ellen White borrowed and there's problems and all these sort of things. Like if you can understand that, you can understand what the problem is, you can understand why we need to understand inspiration better, then let's get together and let's talk about this. And when we've kind of sorted some things out, then let's bring in a wider circle of church members, a more representative circle of church members, and let's talk about it with them. And once we got this sorted out, I'm not trying to suggest it would just be that simple and we'd all come to an easy conclusion. But then let's talk about it with people on the outside of the Adventist church as well. And again, I'm not trying to be cheeky here, as if like, oh, this has never occurred to any Adventist before me. And certainly it has. Certainly there's been books written on this. I'm just saying what I would like to see in the Adventist church is a broader recognition of the challenge of Ellen White and a commitment. Like, let's just stop playing games with it and pretending it doesn't exist and hoping it doesn't come up. And let's talk about it. Because I agree with the people who met there in October. We're at risk of the people who love her the most are going to be contributing to her irrelevancy in some respects by refusing to have a serious conversation about this. So,
Angela Lima, sorry again to interrupt, but Angela, again, just so they don't pass by, Angela Lima has written that conversation did happen in 1919, and what was the result?
Yeah, it certainly, and we see that. That's the frustrating thing, is we see it kind of taking place there. Obviously, it wasn't the full conversation. They talked about it for a bit and then buried it, and then you see it popping up in different letters through almost every decade. We need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. We need to talk about this, and then nothing ever happens.
Yeah,
and here we are. And so I think a large extent, when I've done some episodes more recently in Walter Ray, and I think part of the blowback, the fallout, I guess, from the, we do Frida in the 1950s, and then we do FDR in the 1980s, Ford, Davenport, Ray.
Yes.
Part of the fallout is that the church had not prepared the members. People knew about it, but we didn't want to talk about it. And so when people did go public, like Ray, the membership was not prepared to hear that.
Yeah. Okay.
And maybe there would have been less pain if we would have prepared our membership
for it.
Say, hey guys, we need to talk about this. It's going to be uncomfortable. We don't know what all the answers are going to be yet, but we need to talk about it. Can't do anything about that right now, but I do think this is positive. This is what we need to do. And I think that interview with Bill Johnson might have gone a little bit better for Bill Johnson.
And what was his answer to that middle question about how he sees the authority of Ellen G. White? Can you repeat the question that Walter Martin asked him?
So Martin said, do you regard the interpretations of Ellen White of the Bible, her interpretation of the Bible, do you regard that to be infallible? In other words, if Ellen White says, I don't know, Jesus did this and it's not in the Gospels, do you say, well, then that's what he absolutely did? You know what I mean? Like it can't be changed. There's no point of biblical exegesis, if it contradicts what Ellen White wrote about the Bible. So Johnson replied to that by saying, I'll give you my answer. She is not an infallible interpreter of Scripture.
And John Ankerberg almost gasps from the audience.
Yeah. So this is the problem, because I'm like, okay, well, what does Martin mean by infallible, and what does Johnson mean
Mm,
by infallible? I just want to make sure they understand the same thing by it. Um, does infallible mean never makes mistakes?
mm,
Does infallible mean can never make mistakes? Does infallible mean, what? So it's a very loaded word. It's a very
mm,
loaded word,
mm,
and I think it would have been great if they would have addressed, been a little bit more careful in their discussion and saying, okay, because when you watch it or even read the transcript, they're just kind of, sometimes they're just flying along,
mm.
and it would have been great if Ankerberg kind of would have said, okay, Johnson said she's not an infallible interpreter of scripture. Let's pause. What do you mean by this word, Martin? What do you
Yes.
mean by this word, Johnson? Let's talk about this and slow down a little bit. But, it's TV. Maybe that isn't how you do things in TV.
Yeah.
Um,
What do you
you
think
know,
Martin was meaning, and what do you think um, um, Johnson was meaning?
I don't know. I think I get the impression with Bill Johnson that he was trying to say that there's definitely room for uh exegesis, for discovering things that Ellen White um, missed, like that she is not the total commentary on Scripture, and that her interpretation is not necessarily the only interpretation. And that's why I wonder, like, what does
Mm,
infallible mean? Do you mean it's like this is the only way to read the Bible, or do you
mm,
mean this is one
mm,
way to read the Bible among other ways? But that she didn't make mistakes in interpreting the Bible.
mm, mm.
So I don't know. And I think at one point, Johnson says she's the inspired interpreter, and it's like, okay, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, I think, or other. I don't know if he said that, but what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I remember Martin, in response to Johnson, quoted this articles from 1971 um, saying that human interpretation of the Bible is fallible. We need an infallible interpreter, and then references the spirit of prophecy. So Johnson was Martin drew that up. Martin was like a wizard at doing that research and finding stuff. And
Mm,
it's really
mm.
amazing in an age before the internet. I
Yes.
mean, what the heck did he do? Like, go through every issue of the review,
Yeah.
finding stuff?
Incredible.
Like,
Yeah.
it was incredible. But anyways, so he pulled out that 1971 article and said, okay, the Bible needs to be infallibly interpreted, and we have the spirit of prophecy as our infallible interpreter. And Johnson said, no, I don't agree with that. But then, of course, that always invites the question, then why does the Adventist Review publish it? And then Johnson responded to that, because Ankerberg also said a similar thing. He's like, why don't you just banish these people? When somebody publishes an article like that saying the spirit of prophecy is our infallible interpreter, why is that article even printed? Why are they not disciplined
Mm.
after? Why did they just kind of get away with it? And Johnson said the Adventist church is not a monolithic structure. You find a spectrum and a wide variety and diversity in the church. And it's again, that's just one of those statements where it's like, ask Walter Ray if he feels like there's a wide variety and diversity in the church, and
Exactly.
that it's not a monolithic structure. Johnson also said we have no pope and no cardinals, and it's
Yeah.
like, is that how it feels for
Yeah.
some people?
No. That's the thing, is Johnson in the middle of this 1984. There's the people losing their jobs if they even hint at liking Des Ford.
Yeah,
Whereas they'll allow a very conservative,
right.
yeah, that we're very accepting. We'll allow this in the paper. Well, why don't
Yeah,
you allow a Des Ford article in the paper
yeah.
post Glacier View?
But right, but it's not like the tolerance of the church is not purely ideological. It's not like only conservatives get a pass, because obviously
Okay.
1960s mode Brinsmead did not get a pass.
Yeah.
The church was hard on Brinsmead when he was in his ultra conservative phase.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and then so
But
there are,
they're more
like,
likely to accept a Ellen White's the greatest prophet and her authority is equal to that of the biblical prophets. They're more likely to let that kind of an article go through than one that questions Ellen White.
Sure, certainly. And
On
but
the
I
bell
think
curve.
that's probably the kind of the breaking point is if somebody is challenging church doctrine. That's usually when the tolerance ends, or if it's perceived that they're challenging church doctrine. But like Heppenstall, the funny thing is, and I can't remember the precise quote here, but in the early 1960s, when Heppenstall was fighting Brinsmead, Heppenstall was, what was, I don't know if it was Gill or somebody else. Anyways, I was reading and saying like Heppenstall's take on this situation was far more like was not Adventist. Like Brinsmead in his conservative form was more Adventist, I think, on the nature of Christ than traditionally than Heppenstall was, but Heppenstall's view got accepted. And when Gill is done with his Heppenstall biography, and maybe he can put that more eloquently. But but the idea is why? Well, because Brinsmead was seen as a threat to the church, not Heppenstall. Like I said, we're not. That's the thing that I think drives people crazy. Like we are not we're not theological enthusiasts.
No,
we're not looking for perfect.
We just ascertain if someone's a threat or not.
Yeah, that's kind of how it is. And so I think that's what drives, and I understand why that drives more theologically minded Christians crazy, because they're like, why do you not insist on only correct information gets published? Hold the line of orthodoxy here. Don't let there be a diversity of views on some of these subjects. Insist on it. And it's kind of like, that's just not how we are. We're kind of loose. And but not for everybody.
Yeah.
if you're a threat, we come down hard. And so it's like we're all playing Squid Game in the Adventist church, and so you just just follow the rules and you won't get shot. Anyway, so like you can be all sorts of like a heretic or according to Orthodox Christians. That's why you have Adventists who are like denying the Trinity. And you know what I mean? Like most of us are not in favor of that. The early Adventists, you wonder yourself, the thing I want to ask Ellen White is, how is it that James was a semi-Arian or whatever? And it appears, I think, that Ellen White was some form of, Trinitarian coming from the Methodists. I don't know that she would have put it like that. But did you guys never talk about this? Because this seems like a really big deal to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
It seems like that's something you might have argued about.
James went to his grave not believing in the Trinity.
Yeah. Right. But, to us, that's like a fundamental part of Christianity.
Yeah.
To them, it's like, agree to disagree, I guess.
Yeah.
Until later.
Yeah.
And so even today, you still have anti-Trinitarian and non-Trinitarians in the Adventist church. Now, they do get disfellowshipped, but usually when they're trying to teach it in Sabbath school and agitating about it. But if they just quietly are non-Trinitarian, usually they just get on by because we just, it's not really, like I said last time, Adventism is a coalition, not a monolithic. I agree with Johnson on that point, but we're not a monolithic ideology. It's a coalition of people who are united around the idea at first that Jesus is returning soon. Then later on, the Sabbath and these other things were added as well. But that's it. There's, it's just, and that's why the gospel got lost sight of as well, because that was not an area of emphasis. It was just, we're focused on the second coming Sabbath and these other things. And, we're not here to make sure everyone's orthodox on other issues.
I'll just bring up on the screen what we're talking about at the moment, the Ankerberg program. I think I've got the right one. I'll just press.
Oh yeah, there it is.
There's one of the old originals. I've got an original. My cover's green though, so I don't know if that's. So there's Ankerberg himself chatting away.
Impossible hair. Look at that hair. It's just ridiculous.
There's Walter Martin.
It should be illegal.
Yeah, Walter Martin there on the left and Bill Johnson on the right. And so, you were talking about
the... perfect.
It reminds me of another...
Looks like the poster child for Hitler Youth. Anyways, I'm sorry. That was too far.
There's some famous celebrities of the 70s that also had similar... Who's your famous... looks like He had a kind of a talk show, and there was a movie star that. Anyway, we're sidetracking. So I'm just playing that in the background. We just talked about how Walter Martin had just said to Bill about the authority of Ellen White in this sense of infallible. What kind of happened next that you wanted to raise? And then we might even just randomly bring a little bit on and just see if that can just
let's watch it together. It'll be a watch party. Okay, I'll just cut to the chase here. I think I think what didn't work well, in my opinion, is Martin. Like I said, he's coming at this from a debate perspective, and in that in the discussion, it's kind of like, let's talk and see what each other believes. In the debate, you're trying to kind of nail people down, and so Martin says at one point, if tonight you or any Seventh-day Adventist said Mrs. White was wrong in her interpretation of the investigative judgment, the sanctuary, unclean foods, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what do you think would happen to you, right? It's kind of like a mafia question. Yeah. It's like, hey, do you think you'd disappear? And Johnson said the same thing would happen, I presume, if a Baptist minister stood up and said, I don't believe baptism is a significant doctrine. And so Martin then says, then you're admitting that Mrs. White is a test of faith. She's a test of faith. If she's wrong, you're out. And Johnson says, no, I'm not admitting that. I'm just saying that. And then Martin cuts him off. You just did.
Yeah.
And it's like, in hindsight, I'm like, no, I understand what Johnson is trying to say is baptism by immersion is kind of what makes Baptist a Baptist, at least originally. And if you deny that, then you're not a Baptist anymore. And so what Johnson was trying to say was that, yes, if you deny something that's in the 27 fundamental beliefs, then you're going to get kicked out of the church. It's not because Mrs. White supported it. It's because that's the 27 fundamental beliefs. And I think that was just an example of them talking past each other.
Yes, that happened a bit. And some of it was because Bill was quite good at just sidetracking. If you watch the things he'll say every now and again that, and by the way, Des Ford hasn't been disfellowshipped. And I thought, get back to what Martin just asked you, I think he's just naturally was good at that. The natural.
Yeah, but I also think that was a tendency because of the tag team. Like Martin would say this big thing, and then sometimes Ankerberg would jump in with his thing, and then Johnson would be like, let me go back to that first thing you said. I want to reply to that. Yeah, but you're right though. Like oftentimes the conversation did not flow.
Yeah, there was some
jump around or build.
I agree with you. There were things that I thought, boy, I wish I could write, because I've asked Ankerberg to come on the show here, and just before the second lockdown, it was going to happen. We were literally, I was chatting to his secretary. He was on board. We were looking at times. I've got the emails that back and forth, but then lockdown hit, and I got stuck in Ireland for 5 months nearly. And so I actually lost a lot of connection to my Wi-Fi. And so I lost communication till I got back. And then by then it was, the secretary had moved on. Anyway, we will try and but what I wanted to ask him was, I wanted to kind of piece together some of the questions that weren't totally answered and just see if he thought that he could answer what he thought might have happened. Can we just bring in just quickly a little bit of the audio, and we'll just see if we land on anything that kind of demonstrates what we're actually just talking about?
No. Okay.
To the atonement, the use of that word atonement. And he became quite irate, I would say, and he sent out literature opposing the book, and some people agreed with him. He got a certain following. However, by and large, I don't think that was a large following. Now, that's my assessment. In terms of the denomination's stand on the book, we have not repudiated questions on doctrine. The book went through 8 printings, 150,000 copies. Now, that's a lot of copies. It is still used in college classes. Some people feel it ought to be reprinted.
Those 150,000 copies.
We can get into that. There is another theological volume, a Seventh-day Adventist.
Sorry, what was that?
I know that sometimes we like to brag that 150,000 copies of QOD got sent out, but it's like, I think Leroy Froome sent out half of those personally to anybody who had a bookshelf. Anyway, sorry. Pray tell.
No,
Continue.
that's good. I'm just going to randomly forward through.
Oh, it's like a Russian roulette with this video.
Yeah.
There was no doubt.
Hello, Damon, the People Shark. My name's Russell Brunson.
Perfect.
I'm here today seeking
no,
you gotta
one
get
really,
YouTube
but
Premium.
I'd
Right,
love for you to
strike
be
now.
Whatever about that. And that's in Questions on Doctrine, that it's true. Now, we are getting a completely different story. These brothers are being judged on the basis of their assertion that it can't be, and they're being removed from the church because they challenge it. That is putting Mrs. White over Scripture. She is not over Scripture. She made mistakes. She made false statements. Mrs. White made a statement that I think every Seventh-day Adventist ought to know and memorize. Mrs. White said that in a straight line, she had never uttered a heretical statement. She said that clearly. I never uttered a heretical statement. I will demonstrate to the world that she denied the deity of Jesus Christ, which is,
That one I don't
at
understand.
one point in her career, heresy of the Arian variety, which was espoused by Uriah Smith and the early Adventists who influenced Ellen White. Later, she smartened up and she said this is wrong, and thoughtful Seventh-day Adventist scholars just expunged it. The way Arthur White goes through with his little pen and removes sections from your documents and ellipses. I'm collecting right now a whole series of Arthur's little pen and the things that you've changed through the years. It's scary to see things Seventh-day Adventists don't know are going on, things that are being taken out of Mrs. White. Mrs. White at one time denied the Trinity and the deity of Christ. Mrs. White at one time was vigorous in affirming doctrines which she later turned around 100% and repudiated. When she was writing that you shouldn't eat pork and lobsters and crab, she was munching on oysters, and there were eyewitness testimonies of that. Mrs. White was far from the prophetic voice that is being manifested in Adventist contemporary Adventist literature. I believe Ellen White was a Christian woman. I believe that Ellen White made some remarkable contributions in literature. I also believe she plagiarized materials. I also think, as Newsweek magazine indicates, she borrowed from people without stating it. And if you're familiar with the Foy vision at all, you know that she plagiarized from Foy chapter and verse, line upon line. In fact, I have...
Okay, well, hold on to that. We'll get Dr. Johnson a chance to respond here. Let's take a break, and we'll be right back. Hang in there with us.
No! No!
Oh, another copyright strike's coming. Copyright strike with that music there. Oh, dear.
All right, we're back, and we're talking with Dr. William Johnson, editor of the Adventist Review, and Dr. Walter Martin. And Dr. Johnson, let me come to you. You've heard a lot of things that Walter has said about Ellen G. White. Please respond.
Well, I want to respond first of all to the judgment. As soon as I mentioned the scriptural basis, he said, let's not get into the Calvinistic or Arminian view controversy.
Which has nothing to do with judgment.
Well, it really is, because the question is human will, the place of free will. And what I'm trying to tell you is that the Adventist doctrine of the judgment really rests on a clearly established tradition in the Christian church. Now, if we believe that really our choice has no place in our salvation, that's okay, that's a particular stream. If we believe that our free choice has a particular role, then we go a different stream. There's a large body of Christendom over the centuries that has believed that. And the Adventist doctrine, the pre-Advent judgment, is really solidly in that stream. What we are saying there is that the judgment determines whether I have put my will on the side of Christ, whether I'm united to Him. It does not mean that I have to somehow have come up to absolute perfection in the judgment. Not at all. The judgment is not to tell God something that He doesn't already know. The judgment reveals my relationship to Christ. He is my only hope of salvation. That is basically what we're saying. And you'll find these ideas also in Ellen White. But I don't know why we keep coming back to Ellen White as though she is the authority for Adventists. Here are our fundamental beliefs. And for ministers or anyone else who is called into question, they will be questioned over against the statement of faith.
Okay, let me stop you there. In terms of what you just said, are you saying what I'm afraid you're saying, and that is the fact that you can disagree with Ellen G. White on her interpretation of the 1844 investigative judgment and still be in your position?
The question will be whether my views hold up alongside these fundamental beliefs. This is the test, yes.
Okay, now let me go back to your buddy. Des Ford was in almost one of the same positions. He wrote for the denomination, just like you are. I'm afraid you might disappear in 6 months, too. You are touching what he touched. He sat in the same spot that you did on my program, and I said, Des, you're going to be in trouble. And he says, oh, no, I don't think they'll ever do that. And he disappeared. Now, you're saying the same thing to me on the very same things that he was talking about there. And I want to believe you. I'm all for you. Christians around the world are saying, we hope so. I think Dr. Martin he went on a limb when he wrote that judgment of Seventh-day Adventists back there in 57. He took a lot of heat. What he's finding out, though, is dear people like yourself who are saying that and then disappear behind. And we want to know why. What's behind it?
Listen, let me tell you what happened in Northern California, where we lost maybe 20 or 30 ministers. I sat down and went over every name. And as I say, I know many of those students, many of those ministers. They were my students in seminary. The question was, can you support and preach the fundamental beliefs of the church? This was the issue. Granted, brother, that you may have questions in certain areas, you may be working out some things for yourself. Can you, in honesty, support these fundamentals? That was the bottom line. And I know some of these fellows were given months, leaves of absence to work out their thinking. Some came to Washington to sit down and just talk to anyone they wanted to. Some were told, if you want to, you can go into the White Estate, open up any drawer you want to.
All right, but I've heard, too, that's much... Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I have to disagree with that.
Well, it happened. Yeah, I was there. I saw it happen.
There are things...
We might leave that there. People are getting an idea of what we're talking about here in our closing realm of our interview, our discussion today. I think I'm glad we showed a bit of that, but I didn't want it to turn into a reaction video. But hey, that'd be fun sometime to watch something like this and just say, hey, press pause and we'll just have a little chat.
Would be. Yeah, it'd be a blast to do that. I think Miles put the whole thing up on his channel, and but it'd be fun to do that with commentary.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to do, especially if you can get John onto the show.
Yes, I will. You know, last week I wrote, as I promised, to Bob Brinsmead. Haven't heard back, but I've asked my my helpers to ask him as well, and I will now this week promise you that I will get back in touch with the John Ankerberg.
Fantastic.
I've tried to get Ratcliffe on as well, but he's been very unwell.
Oh, well, sorry to hear that. You tell Bob, though, I'll buy fruit. How much fruit do I need to buy? If that helps him, I'll buy fruit. I don't know what to do with John Ankerberg, but we'll be happy. It'd be great to watch at least part of this with him, and just ask him, like, what was going through your head when you asked this question, or how did you feel about this answer?
I'm onto it.
Here, I'll wrap up with this. Just kind of my take on this show. I think there were some really interesting points made by both Martin and Johnson there, and I think on the Martin and Ankerberg side of the conversation, like they think that Adventists see Ellen White as an infallible interpreter of the Bible, which means that this essentially elevates her to kind of canonical status, that she's like a part of Scripture, or maybe even above Scripture, as was mentioned in that clip. Which would be a repudiation of what Adventists promised in QOD. They were very vociferous that we don't see her as above the Bible or canonical or anything like that. So now they're feeling like, okay, well, something changed in Adventism. This is not good. But, Martin fixated on that quote you mentioned, where Ellen White said there is one straight chain of truth without one heretical sentence in that which I have written. And she was talking about her testimonies in particular there. But, like, this is I look at this and I'm like, okay, here's the challenge. If Ellen White really did have a gift of prophecy, or anybody else, like there's obviously, we have this, of course they're going to be authoritative. If Ellen White, if we honestly believe she has a gift of prophecy, if she's not authoritative in some way, shape, or form, then what is the point of the gift? You know what I mean? If it doesn't give you if as a prophet you're not speaking for God, then you're not a prophet. And if you are speaking from God, then obviously if Isaiah says something or Jeremiah or whoever, you should listen. But at the same time, does that put her equal with the Bible? Well, Adventists have never wanted to go that far. So what does this mean then? Like, how do we hash this out? So I feel like Martin and company are a little scandalized that, how can she have this authority in your community? And to that, Bill Johnson replied, well, it's authority in the sense of continuing counsel or value to the church. And Martin, I think, was quite right by saying, no. Ellen White plays a much bigger role than just being a counselor.
Yeah.
And that's clearly true. I think Johnson was downplaying a little bit there. And again, I'm not being too harsh because, when you're in the moment and you're just speaking, I don't know. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. But certainly that was downplaying. Ellen White plays a much bigger role in the church than that. So anyways, I feel like I feel like the evangelicals, it was hard for them to accept that Ellen White would have some kind of authority. And for Adventists, I don't, but again, if she had the spiritual gift, then she should have the authority that comes with it. On the other hand, Adventists, I don't know that did a great job trying to explain what does that mean for somebody to have this gift.
I mean, that's a very
in light
good
of the
question,
Bible,
because in many ways, what the nutshell topic should be: was she given messages from God or not? It suddenly boils down to that one kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
if she was, then listen to her.
Exactly. Yeah.
If she wasn't, then don't.
And what would you say?
It's never that black and white.
We're talking about Miles and his great show, Answering Adventism. There's a guy he showed a bit of a clip of the other day. What's his name? He was a Jewish guy that became an Adventist, and he's quite the apologist.
Cliff Goldstein.
Goldstein, yes. And Goldstein saying if nothing happened in 1844, then the whole thing is a lie. When I spoke to Bill Johnson in the second interview, like he's in his late 80s, and I was so thrilled that he came on the program, SDA&A would not have continued if it hadn't been for that interview. So I'm grateful for Bill Johnson. I literally was about wrapping it up. I was just about to stop. So I'm very grateful for that. But in that interview, Bill, I said, can you still be an Adventist if you don't believe anything supernatural happened in 1844? And he said, yeah, sure. But I might be wrong. It might be just my brain. But if she wasn't a prophet, like to me, if you don't believe 1844 as a supernatural event in heaven that sparked this whole investigative judgment and the sanctuary doctrine, Ellen White saw in vision that this was true, that Hiram's cornfield inspiration was true. There's some places where she mentions that the dates were accurate that William Miller had. So if she claims to have got that message from God, and you can say as an Adventist, I don't believe that, nothing happened supernaturally in heaven, and some say, oh, well, something providential happened, and that's enough. But I just think that's just kind of a tricky little slippery escape mode. If you're saying God told me William was right, something happened that night, just didn't return, but then you can also, if you say that that's false, but you can then say in the next breath, it's okay to be an Adventist if I don't believe that. I just struggle with that, because to me, the implication is that she was not a prophet if she got that wrong.
Yeah. Here's the interesting question, Peter. Oh, yeah. Here's what I would love to ask a room full of Adventists. Would we still hold on to 1844 on the Bible alone? How much of holding on to 1844 is to preserve Ellen White?
Oh, yeah, good question.
You know what I mean? Like, is it, because you're right. I think for a lot of people that I've talked to about this, the concern is then that means Ellen White was wrong about what happened in 1844. And then once you start pulling that thread, how far, what unravels? So it's kind of like we need that piece. Now, I know there's biblical arguments, from Daniel 8:14 to anyways. I'm not saying there's no biblical reasoning for 1844. I'm just saying I wonder how much of the actual belief Adventists have in 1844 is held up because of a desire to preserve Ellen White's authority and her giftedness.
Yeah, 100%.
Because without that, if she had never said anything about 1844, I mean, to be an Adventist, like by definition, Seventh-day Adventist, you got the Sabbath part of that. And then Adventist just means you believe Jesus is coming soon. And you're looking forward to his coming and trying to be ready for his coming and tell others about his coming. Like, you don't, strictly speaking, need 1844 to do either of those things. Nor do you need Ellen White to do either of those things. So I think that's probably the basis by which Bill Johnson says it's not necessary.
I agree.
But
I think those like yourself that stay within the church because of those same kind of reasons, and I'm not going to question you here at all, but I think there are others that also go, okay, that's good, that's well and good, let's do that. But wow, if nothing supernatural happened that night, if that's what I believe, she is a false prophet. Okay, then I then go back into living the good Adventist lifestyle of soon coming and Adventists and good food and friendship and camaraderie. But at the back of your mind, surely it gnaws away at Bill Johnson before he would sleep each night. I don't believe she was told by God that something. Now, I'm putting words into his mouth there. I've spoken to Norm Young about this, and he says nothing happened that night supernaturally in heaven, but it was providential. And Ellen White, you have to interpret her visions. They are from God, but they are interpreted as it brought about the Adventist church. And then I say, well, so what? I mean, there's nothing new then in Adventism. What are you revealing as a new offering to the world if you take away that very vision of the investigative judgment being confirmative? You've just got a good bunch of people that like to hang out and eat good food, etc. There is no new doctrine. There's the Sabbath in other denominations. Every other, there's only one unique doctrine within Adventism, and that's the sanctuary. And so surely it gnaws away at people's minds as they drift off to sleep. I'm in a church that I love. Providentially, it's come together. We're doing this great stuff. We've got churches and schools and ADRA and relief funds, and we're doing a great thing for communities. But maybe Ellen was a false prophet. That gnawed away in my back of my head.
Yeah, sure. I can understand that. I don't want to. I think getting into 1844 is a whole nother subject. I will say this on my behalf. I really think it depends on why people are in Adventism. I think if I can definitely understand why people like Clifford Goldstein take the position they do, and that 1844 is foundational. It proved, because here's the thing: if you're a church coming up, I don't know, in the 19th century. You kind of have to justify why God is raising you up, and if God isn't raising you up, then what are you doing? Just go join another church or, whatever. But why would you think God is doing something new by raising up a new group of Christians in the 19th century? The Mormons have to answer this question. Mary Baker Eddy and her group has to answer this question, and Adventists have to answer this question. And so that's kind of the restorationist theme at that time too. We're here to restore original Christianity. Okay, fine. So I definitely understand that idea of, it's not just 1844, it's the idea that Adventism is this prophetic movement that God raised up to warn the world to three angels message. I get that. That gives, a lot of meaning. I understand why people believe that. For other people, I don't think it's just a country club, whether or not you have Ellen White. If you don't have Ellen White, I think, I think there's meaning in Adventism besides. I think Adventism, I know I see some of you guys in the comments like, Matthew, leave the church, get out of there, or someone saying I'm going to be fired soon. Marlon says, I don't think Matthew will be on the payroll much longer. I don't know if that's out of concern for me or what, but I'll be fine.
That's what John Ankerberg was concerned about with this topic.
Yeah, and look at Bill Johnson. He didn't have his heresy trial.
and I think while it sounds like we're talking about the sanctuary and Ellen White and this, if the nutshell core reason that the rest of the world, having embraced QOD, if we're unsure if she was a prophet or not, and yeah, it's not a country club and we're just having a great time. I think there's a lot more meaning, of course.
No one's having fun in Adventism.
Unless they come to a Peter Dixon bush dance. But yeah, I think the key point and why it comes back to QOD and comes back to the Bill Johnson interview is Adventists are not clearly claiming the Ellen White thing. They're of two minds about it. Yeah. And there's, like you used a good word before, I can't remember what it was, but there's something that just doesn't ever get resolved within Adventism that other churches, you know, they seem to have events that resolve and then those events come again. Adventists are in this kind of loop, this endless loop. What were you going to say about? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, getting fired. I was going to say, I think Adventism personally. I think Adventism is a really interesting idea. I think it has a lot of potential that we have not even come close to really scratching theologically. For instance, the holism of Adventism. Like nobody else, it's not that we have all original ideas. As you point out, I think, the sanctuary is the only one that really is unique. But what's interesting is the packaging. Like if we really believe what we say, and that is we're a church designed that has a message of care for the entire person, health, spiritually, mentally, intellectually. Like we want to see people develop in all of those areas, which again, we've fallen way short of, right? Like it's almost laughable, the distance between the ideal and the practice. But to me, like that ideal is really compelling in Adventism. Like what does that look like if an Adventist church was a place where the entire person, where every aspect of a human being is being shaped and grown and challenged and nurtured? What would that look like if you went to church to get mental health care, emotional care, physical care, spiritual care? Like that's in the Adventist DNA. Like there's nods to it, there's mentions of it. But it really is hardly practiced. It's hardly put together. And so to me, that's part of the thing. What I love about Adventism is like there's these seeds that are there that I'm like, if only we could like water that and stop arguing about the
I agree
lesser things.
Yeah.
I want to see where that goes. I want to see what that looks like when you have a church that's like that.
And I agree. And I think I've often referred to this gem of Adventism that I see within Adventism that has never been allowed to flourish. Can I just do a quick plug for Stephen Beagles? He and I'm just going to do a quick little plug here, have set up in the hope of helping this kind of type of Adventist. Let's have a quick look here. I'll just quickly share it.
Okay.
If that's okay, and then we'll wrap up. But this is with what you just said in mind. We've set up a very basic website called Adventist Gospel Network. And at the homepage, it's, where is it gone? I don't know if you can see. If I click the home page, there's a nice little picture. If you're an Adventist looking for gospel-centered teachings, then this site is for you. Our mission is to provide links to content by gospel Adventist writers, authors, and scholars around the world. This site is currently under construction. And then we've got links to websites, and we've got gospeladventist.com, Good News Unlimited, Desmond Ford, Fleetwood's amazing YouTube channel. Carl Wagner's there with his chronicles. There's another one here, Opinion SDA, and then there's also an articles section. But the reason I share that is because we were just talking about these gems that can be found within Adventism, that because no one that has these kind of gems, there's some reason it hasn't taken off. And so our hope is by creating a bit of a network for all the independent ministries that see themselves as gospel Adventists, that carrying a better focus on community and the Sabbath and the good things about Adventism. It's a resource place, basically, where people can go. I'll just quickly bring up the address there. It's just at adventistgospelnetwork.wordpress.com. We can't afford to pay for a .com and a proper colorful website yet, but one day.
Okay, donate right now, guys. Come on.
And so I think that I have seen in all my 300 interviews, and I get in trouble from this from all sides of Adventism, but that's okay. I see something there that is special, that that a lot of Adventists that I've talked to also see, but I don't see that it's ever really had it. Like you said, it's just a seed. I haven't seen it grow into what it could be. And so this is a small little hope that people can maybe gather together and find a place where these gems of Adventism are. It's not a it's not a place for SDA Q&A links or anything like that, as far as the channel itself. There might be some episodes we'll put there, but if people are watching and you feel that you have an independent ministry that is gospel Adventist focused, let us know. Okay, wrapping it up. What sort of last thoughts have you got to say on
anyways,
our discussion? And what
I think it's a real I think you can't really end a discussion about QOD because, as I think you pointed out earlier, it's not over yet.
Yes,
it's morphed, and the term QOD in the Adventist Evangelical Conferences is largely forgotten by most Adventists and probably most evangelicals. But the basic dynamic there is still ongoing, and I think until we face the issues that were raised and maybe and answer them and address them, I think we're just going to keep doing this thing, and maybe it's something that each generation has to kind of sort out for themselves, right? It's kind of like the gospel. It's not enough that grandfather believed in it. Like, every generation's got to face it and decide whether they are going to pursue the Lord by faith or not. And you can't make that decision for your kids. You can't make that decision for your nephews and nieces. And I think that's where we're at. I get a little. I think there is. I see the bad in Adventism, to be sure, and I think that is amply pointed out in a number of places. And but I do think there's a lot of good in Adventism too, that I do wish people would understand. Like, there's one thing to talk about official beliefs and the biblicalness of them, and obviously that's super important. We want to be biblical as believers. There's also the Adventism that people experience, and I think that's important too. I think you can have people who experience grace sometimes in spite of their leaders, and I think sometimes you can have people who experience a toxic environment in spite of their leaders. And but I do think there's enough interesting things in Adventism, beautiful things in Adventism, things that I want to see nurtured and I want to water. That's what I want to devote my life to. And I understand that's not for everybody, but that's what I've devoted my life to. So for those of you who are worried that I might get fired or disappear, as Ankerberg was very concerned of, I'm not going to disappear. I do love the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I love being Adventist. I say that as somebody who can carry on a conversation with anybody about the church's problems and shortcomings. I'm not ignorant of these things. But I think anything that you love, including the Catholic Church or any other church, you often love in spite of what it is. Nothing is perfect. I think a good, the scandals that have rocked the Catholic Church in years past, like, you don't love the church because it did those things. You love it in spite of those things because you see beautiful things that are worth staying for. True things that you think are worth staying for. And so that's kind of how I feel. That's the relationship I have with Adventism. I hope my church values me and appreciates me and the contributions that I make. But at the end of the day, I'm here because I want to be here. And so Jimmy in the comments, I can't leave. Yes, I can leave if I want to leave. Some days it's really easy to make that decision. But I don't want to. I enjoy my life and I enjoy my relationship with the Lord.
In the new year, I've got a few Mormons lined up that I'll be interviewing. Not that they have anything to do with Adventism, but just to discuss the parallels. And some of them in the kind of work that we've done building up to it have found a way to really enjoy still being a Mormon. So I'm not going to be trying to tell them not to be Mormons, but because, in spite of the fact that, Joseph Smith may or may not be a false prophet, they have found a place that they're very, very happy with, and so who are we to condemn them for finding that happy space?
Well, that's true. And I mean, obviously we want people to be biblical and, have a healthy relationship with the Lord. I will say this, I'm actually friends with some Mormons on Facebook. They met them as missionaries and we just remained friends. And if you go to missionarymall.com, you can buy all sorts of Mormon gear. So if you want to go ahead and buy yourself a really flimsy polyester tie in preparation for that meeting with a white shirt, and I don't know if you can get a name card there or not, but at missionarymall.org, that's where you can get all the Mormon stuff.
I'm looking that up straight after the show.
Yeah.
I'm just going to write it down. Missionary Mall.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. If you look at it, you go to clearance. There's sister shoes and elder shoes, and
that's Missionary Mall. What was the other thing you said?
Missionarymall.org.
.org.
Yes. So yeah, you can buy all sorts of Mormon stuff there. That's just a fun little hack. I will say this last thing in favor of the Mormons. One thing I do appreciate about them is they have just finished publishing their, I guess for them, critical edition of Joseph Smith's papers. It's been over a decade. And but I commend them because that was an enormous amount of work. They finished ahead of schedule. And I tell you, when the Mormons want to do something, man, they do something.
Yeah.
And the Mormons in some way are very impressive. And they get stuff done.
Yeah. Just wait till I start interviewing Scientologists, and they give me the reasons for why they're happy staying within that too.
Yeah,
maybe there's a cutoff point.
If you can get Tom Cruise on here, I'd say go for it. I think that's the only Scientologist you're allowed to bring on here that nobody will mind.
Yeah, maybe John Travolta.
Yeah,
there's a famous Australian singer
maybe.
too, actually. Famous Australian singer that's. That I do have a 2 degrees of separation with that is a Scientologist.
No, there you go. I don't understand that one, but maybe people don't understand why I do what I do either, so it's okay.
Well, I have enjoyed our conversation. I was saying earlier I could hardly sleep last night. I was looking forward to it so much. So thank you so much for being on the program. Was there anything you wanted to finish with our big in-depth look at QOD? We've probably only scratched the surface in our 6 hours of part 1 and part 2, but was there any kind of final words you wanted to just to say about it to tie it all together?
No, I will invite people, of course, in a shameless act of self-promotion to go listen to the podcast. I will also say that that Gil Valentine has done the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventist article on QOD as well, which is a pretty good, lengthy thing.
He's someone.
And so if you want to read more about it there, you can go there.
Just to plug Adventist History Podcast, your podcast, the best ever understanding of QOD arose in my brain from listening to your series on that. Is there seven or eight episodes on it? Seven episodes. And what number is it? Just so we can refer people to.
Oh gosh. So that'll be season 2, episode 43. It was like 2022, spring of 2022 area.
I highly recommend people go and check that out. If you want to really understand QOD, you have truly created a great document there for people to connect with.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, and everybody in the comments, I forgive you.
Yeah. Oh no. He's out. He's done now. Where's your holy water?
Sprinkle the holy water on the screen. You're listen, Jimmy. He's too comfy. He's got his salary. How much do you think I make, man?
Hey, this is where I keep my holy water.
Do this for the money?
Yeah. No, people don't do this for the money. One last quick plug. Those of you that would like to support my channel, go and do the QR code there. I made $20 a fortnight ago, $157 last week. Nothing this week. Hopefully that changes after I brought this up on the screen. I'm about to go and buy a new chair. This one, which was actually funded by my SDA Q&A supporters 2 or 3 years ago, has given up the ghost, and I'm about this afternoon to go and buy a new chair. So hopefully by next week. Quick plug for next. Sorry to do this right at the end there. You're exhausted. It's way past your bedtime. But next week, Arthur Clem and I. Important to note, different days than normal. Instead of my time Wednesday, Thursday, which is your time Tuesday, Wednesday, it's going to be my time Tuesday, Wednesday, your time Monday, Tuesday. If you're in LA time, work out the rest over the States there. We're going to have a great 2 discussions back to back on Fred Veltman, Ellen White's Did She Borrow? How extensive? That's going to be our discussion for 2 episodes. There'll be one more episode still going ahead on the Wednesday LA time, Thursday Sydney, New South Wales time. I don't know who that is yet. And then in the new year, there'll be 2 weeks where we probably don't have something on. Lots of Christmas stuff going on, my wife's birthday, New Year's Eve, all this kind of stuff. I think that means we kick off again on Wednesday the 10th of January. So just everyone keep an ear out for that. And next year we're going to just kick off with some more incredible interviews. I don't even know what they'll be just yet, but I know they're going to be incredible. My very special guest, Matthew Lucio, thank you so much for being on the program. It has been awesome. Go and check out Adventist History Podcast. And until next time, we'll see you all later. Yes.